Chapter 1168. The former prince of the Black Dragons and current king of the Black Dragons, Nefarian, was no fool. He was puzzled and uneasy by Duque's display of power. The Alliance's hero group had slowed down their attacks and even had the time to parade in front of Blackwing's lair. This was a warning to him. Of course, he knew what kind of people the Black Hand brothers were. If they dared to leave Blackrock Mountain when the Alliance's strongest forces were free, they would be courting death. In addition, the Molten Core's fire elemental monsters had all been withdrawn. Nefarian had no choice but to order the Blackrock Beastmen to retreat. There was something else that almost drove Nefarian crazy. The princess of the Black Dragons, Onyxia, actually surrendered after being defeated, and willingly became the human magician Duke Marcus's mount. At first, Nefarian thought that it was a smokescreen released by the humans. Later, when Nefarian's shadow clone went to the front lines to supervise the retreat, he coincidentally saw Onyxia running over to launch an air attack on the retreating Blackrock Beastmen. Nefarian then realized that his sister had really fallen. Onyxia. You're crazy. You actually became a lackey of the humans. Nefarian's illusion roared at the familiar figure in the sky. To be honest, Onyxia did not want to face her brother like this. This scene was like a certain island girl pretending to be an obedient girl in the day, and at night she ran into her brother at the bar, just imagining the drama and *T would make one want to die of embarrassment. At that moment, Onyxia's 10-meter-long dragon body visibly twitched. The originally agile snake-like dragon neck was like some kind of rusty machine, unable to turn for a long time. For a few seconds, Onyxia wanted to just walk away and escape from reality. In the end, she managed to stop herself. She flapped her huge black wings that were almost fully healed and hovered not far above Nefarian's illusion. Yo! My dear brother, are you trying to say that I'm a disgrace to the dragon race? Alright, since Alexstrasza was once captured and tortured by the beast men, I want to say that I'm not the most shameful one. Onyxia's lack of ambition almost made Nefarian faint from anger. Where's your ambition? Where is your pride? Where's your dignity as a dragon? Nefarian roared at the sky. She seemed to shrug her shoulders, but she didn't. Sorry. My eldest brother. How insignificant were these things in front of the power of destiny. When you have the chance to face Duque, you will know that you are actually fighting against the god of fate. You. Nefarian was at a loss for words. After a long while, he said, you are willing to give up on yourself. You are willing to become a human's mount and dog just to go against me? Don't forget. You're no match for me. Onyxia had an indifferent look on her face. Fallen? Perhaps. Although the humans are now saying that I have forsaken the darkness for the light, whether or not I should fight with you, I really have not thought about it. Perhaps, with Duque's encouragement, I might really have the courage to fight you. Nefarian suddenly remembered something. Wait. Onyxia, you. Did Duque bite you on the back of your neck? A rare blush appeared on Onyxia's dark dragon face. Mortals would not be able to tell the difference, but Nefarian, who was of the same dragon race, could tell at a glance. You. At this moment, Nefarian was on the verge of breaking down. Regardless of whether he admitted it or not, he seemed to have become the brother-in-law of a lowly human that he looked down on. If it was not an illusion but his real body, it was very likely that he would have vomited blood at this moment. You useless thing. From today onwards, I will no longer admit that I have a shameful sister like you. You are exiled, Onyxia. Every black dragon will see you as an enemy. Nefarian said ruthlessly. Unfortunately, he was only halfway through his sentence when Onyxia's invisible pretentiousness choked him back into his stomach. But Duque has already spoken to Alexstrasza. He said that after observing me for a period of time in the Dragon's Slumber Shrine, he will consider conferring me the title of Earth Guardian. Pfft. Nefarian spat. If he was an old man with a weak heart, he might have died of a heart attack. He and her father, the Wing of Death, Nesario, had cheated the other 4 dragon clans in the ancient war. That was why the Black Dragon clan had the glory of suppressing the 4 dragon clans for 10,000 years. In the circle of black dragons that were popular for being sinister and cunning, most of them saw Nesario's betrayal as a wise and heroic move. Well, now the title and responsibility that their father did not want and spurned back then had actually been taken back by his own sister. Wasn't this a slap to the face for him and his dead father? Not only was it a slap to the face, but it was also a slap to the dragon teeth. All the harsh words and all the vicious curses that Nefarian could think of were stuck in his throat. He could not say anything for a long time. You. How are you? You've got guts. You've obviously fallen shamelessly, but you've actually fallen to the point of reason. Onyxia. I'll give you one last chance. Immediately fly to the highest point of the Blackstone Tower, kneel to me, and beg for my mercy. Otherwise, when I'm free, I'll definitely hang your dragon head on the main entrance of the Blackstone Fortress, and show all the dragons in the world your final fate. Before Onyxia could answer, she suddenly saw the flash of a portal beside her. A burst of light lit up, and Duque's figure appeared on the dragon's saddle on Onyxia's back. Duque patted her lightly, and Onyxia immediately understood. She immediately descended, and her huge body shrank at a high speed. In the blink of an eye, she turned into the appearance of Countess Katrana. In front of Nefarian, Duque hugged Onyxia from behind and gently bit the back of her neck. Onyxia did not resist, and just let Duque do as he pleased. Nefarian's eyeballs almost popped out of their sockets when he saw this. Unfortunately, he could not stop all this at all, because he was just an illusion here. Looking at Nefarian, who was trembling with anger, Duque laughed, and directly made Onyxia gasp for breath. Yo! Nefarian, you seem to have forgotten something, right? Do you remember? Who let your father's head be hung on the main entrance of the Dragon's Sleep Shrine? Nefarian shuddered, and immediately recalled the horror of Duque in the past. That's right. It was this seemingly inconspicuous mortal in front of him who single-handedly planned 2 ambushes. The first ambush directly killed the strongest of the black dragons, Nethario. The second ambush directly subdued the noblest female Onyxia of the black dragons. Yes. Nefarian, you're the target of my 3rd hunt for the black dragons. Chapter 1169. Nefarian, do you dare to come out of your lair and fight me? Duque's declaration of challenge was so domineering. Onyxia's beautiful eyes flickered, revealing a rare infatuation and fanaticism. How could the noble princess of the Black Dragon submit to a mere mortal? Yes. Only such a great man with such spirit. Only such a peerless powerhouse who drove the world forward. That was enough for her to be willing to submit to him. She witnessed with her own eyes how Duque completely overwhelmed her brother in terms of aura. This feeling, which she did not know was whether it was depravity or sublimation, dominated Onyxia's entire soul in an instant. Violent and blazing. That's right. This is the kind of male I want. It was impossible for Duke to hear Onyxia's shouts, and even more so, he didn't know that this was the ultimate weapon against Onyxia, a person who worshipped the strong to the bone. Nefarian was stunned. He was truly stunned. For a moment, he almost wanted to agree to Duque's challenge on the spot. A second later, Nefarian shrank back. Although Duque's reputation among the mortals was like the sun in the sky, it was simply unbearable in the Black Dragon clan. How did Nethario die? How did Onyxia die? Didn't he still fall into Duke's trap and die? Duque made it sound like a duel, but who knew if he would be the one challenging all the powerhouses of the Alliance and the Horde, as well as his disappointing sister. He had no way of knowing what the molten core looked like, but Duke had obviously freed up his hands. Moreover, as a rare great scientist in the Dragon clan, Nefarian had always believed that with the passage of time, the chance of victory was on his side. When he thought of this, his refusal was logical. I refuse. You're just a mortal, you're not qualified for me to accept your challenge. Of course, if you and your laughable teammates have the ability to kill your way to my throne at the top of the Blackrock Spire, I don't mind personally granting you eternal death. He he he. Nefarian's phantom disappeared after letting out a few pretentious chuckles. Duque heaved a sigh of relief when he felt Nefarian's consciousness fading away. He immediately teleported back to Karazhan with Onyxia. As soon as they stepped out of the portal, Onyxia turned around and revealed a bright smile with a blush. Yo! My dear master, why do I feel that you don't want my brother to come out and fight with you? Duque patted the dragon butt, and Onyxia immediately let out a coquettish cry of surprise. No sane commander would want to fight on two fronts. Because that usually meant defeat and death. Although we used Majordomo to deceive the sleeping Ragnaros, the extinguishing of the flame rune will eventually trigger his nerves. Now, the only way to deal with Ragnaros was to scare Nefarian and prevent him from escaping. Of course, it's also a good choice if Nefarian comes out to die. Onyxia's eyes turned craftily. You're afraid that when we're dealing with the Fire Demon King, my brother will come out, right? That's why you're deliberately trying to scare him. Will this work? Duque's eyes flashed. He. I can't afford to take the risk, but how can he? After all, I'm a man with the titles of Dragon Slayer and Dragon Vanquisher. Since you black dragons like to play tricks, he will naturally overthink things. Overthinking things means that he is not decisive. Nefarian will definitely not dare to come out before his research is completed. Aren't you afraid that my brother's research, for someone who has already peeped into fate, your brother's research is not worth mentioning? Fate. Onyxia felt as if her heart was being violently tugged at. She could not be afraid of the strong, retribution, and revenge, but she was afraid of fate. Moreover, when faced with an existence that knew all your cards but could not do anything about it, the deepest despair would definitely drive her crazy. It was this helplessness and desperation that caused her to surrender. Suddenly, Onyxia knelt down. Master, did you know? You were too domineering just now, I like it. Huh? Duque felt that something was wrong. Wait, what are you doing? Didn't you always ask me to taste the dragon-taming whip? Now I'm taking the initiative to taste it. Looking up, Onyxia threw Duque a flirtatious and slightly bewitching look. Duque felt his bones go limp. Dragon taming was just a sideshow. Duque's attention was still focused on the molten core. During this period, Ragnaros's consciousness showed signs of awakening twice, but Majordomo, who was under Duque's control, managed to fool him. Finally, on the 16th of September, the great craftsman Jurban and Duke Hydasis came together to visit. Duque. Everything is ready. A dwarf and a water elemental. Even though they were two different species, they had the same fanaticism in their eyes. Duque smiled. I knew you could do it. On the 18th of September, the Alliance and the Horde invested almost all the powerful fighters they could. On the Horde side, only Thrall was left to guard the main city. On the Alliance's side, General Abendis guarded the Lordaeron continent, Boulang Bronzebeard and Reginald Windsor led the army to guard the Scorching Canyon and Burning Steppes, as well as Turalian who stayed in front of the Dark Portal. The rest of the people who were above the realm of heroes were all involved in this battle that would decide the fate of the Eastern Kingdom and even the entire Azeroth. If they failed, the enraged Ragnaros would not only destroy half of the Riedridge Mountain, but the entire southern continent. The surrounding air was still hot and suffocating. Grom and the other powerful fighters of the Horde were not used to the cold spray on their shoulders and the strange mask that could be worn at any time. But seeing that all the powerful fighters of the Alliance wore it, they could only force themselves to use it. Fortunately, it was easy to operate. In theory, they only needed to press one of the white buttons on their shoulders to continuously spray out cold mist. According to Jurban, this could prevent them from suffocating to death by inhaling too much hot gas. Majordomo, who was supposed to be one of the leaders of the Molten Core, listened to Duque's lecture like a grandson. Wajin felt a strange sense of joy. For some reason, Wajin had a feeling that the hunt for the Fire Demon King would be quite successful. It wasn't just him. Everyone was about to face the powerful elemental demigod, Ragnaros, who was second only to the ancient gods. However, everyone remembered that Duke had killed so many powerhouses with no losses. At most, he had let Arthas escape. Everyone was brimming with confidence. Chapter 1170. They were in the northeast part of the molten core. As they watched Majordomo walk towards the huge lava pool in the middle of the spiral-shaped land, everyone started to get nervous. They couldn't help but be nervous. The terrain here was terrible. In a sense, this place was like the mosquito coil that Du Zhe used before he transmigrated. The lava was about 10 meters wide and could be passed through after it cooled down. On both sides, there was an endless river of lava. If an ordinary person were to fall into that high temperature, they would probably be dead in an instant. Even if they wore many pieces of fire resistance equipment, they wouldn't last long. The brave Grom had already tried it when he was scouting the area. If he jumped in with almost a full set of iron armor, he would probably be able to survive for a minute. Any longer than that, and even God wouldn't be able to save him. Even so, the other party members wearing 3 pieces of fire resistance equipment could only last 20 seconds at most if they were healthy. Unless they received healing spells midway, they would still die. Unfortunately, the other party members couldn't wear as many fire resistance equipment as the warriors who were carrying Ragnaros. Otherwise, their damage output would be reduced. It was almost midnight. This was the best time of the day to attack. Although this was almost negligible to the Fire Demon King, it was still better to have a higher chance of winning. Everyone heard Duque shout, "Last 3 minutes. Everyone, please check your status again." King's blessing, blessing of power, blessing of wisdom, arcane wisdom. Apart from that, Magni, who was carrying Ragnaros, started to drink the lung cocktail, made from the cursed land's wild boar lung slices. He also drank the Titan potion, which could increase his stamina. The rangers checked each of their arrows, and the bandits carefully applied a special potion to their weapons. Of course, none of this could compare to an enchantment, the fire-extinguishing enchantment provided by the Hydrathea water elemental. This enchantment did not appear in the original history. It could easily transform the damage of cold weapons into water elemental damage. Even bandits could use their daggers to stab Ragnaros, who was a combination of fire elemental. This was the key to this battle. Ready. Team leaders, please report. Duque shouted again. Team 1 completed. Team 2 completed. When everything was ready, Duque finally nodded at the shivering Majordomo. Trembling, the manager gave his last warning. You must reveal the secret of the Son of Flames at all costs. You will pay a huge price for your reckless behavior. Speaking up to this point, it was no different from the original history. Who would have thought that the next topic would change? Why don't we give up? Once I summon the true master of this place, all existences will have to face his endless wrath. Not only your puny lives, but even my life will be over. Huh? Wait a minute. Something didn't seem right. Forget it, I don't care about him. He's going to die anyway. Duque pursed his lips. Onyxia in human form walked over on the spot with a malicious smile. Majordomo shuddered. His buttocks shook, and he wagged his tail out of habit. In the past, his long tail would have responded to him. Now, more than half of its tail was gone. Not to mention swimming quickly, it could not even stand steadily. The Black Dragon Princess had traumatized him greatly. I'll do it. Under everyone's gaze, Majordomo raised his hands high like a charlatan. After a string of fire elemental incantations that no one could understand, he cried, Ragnaros, the King of Flames, he is older than this world itself. Now it's too late. Be it me or you, surrender before him. Surrender before everyone's doomsday. No one paid attention to his pitiful cries. Everyone focused on the center. Everyone could clearly feel that the lava pool at the center that had been calm a moment ago had suddenly begun to boil. It was like a fountain, spewing higher and higher. Then, in less than 3 seconds, the high-spewing lava and the fire elemental particles in the air gathered at high speed, forming a huge figure that was breathtaking. Below it were nearly 10 cone-shaped tornadoes of fire that gathered in a clockwise or anti-clockwise direction. Moving up, there was a slender waist that did not match its burly figure. Above it was an inverted triangular upper body. On its abdomen, there were more than 10 golden metal plates that seemed to be embedded in it to protect Ragnaros's abdomen. Then there was a well-defined breastplate, a pauldron made of 3 sharp rocks, and a gauntlet that kept flashing with fire. On his back was a pair of wings that looked like flying wings, and on his huge right arm was a large divine artifact hammer that had a head the size of a house, hand of Savras, Ragnaros the Balrog. Looking at the golden light on the hammer and the huge metal protrusions on the hammer head, it was hard to imagine what would happen to a mortal if they were hit by such a huge hammer. When Ragnaros woke up, he immediately saw his servant kneeling in front of him. He did not care about the reason at all and asked, "Why did you wake me up?" "Majordomo, why did you disturb me?" Majordomo secretly glanced at Duque, who was not far behind him, and said the line that he had prepared earlier, "It's because of these invaders. They broke into your temple and wanted to steal your secrets." Duque squinted. He compared the conversation between his memory and the system elf that he had left in his retina. He finally realized what was wrong. Majordomo did not call Lager master. Huh? What the hell is this? Even so, Ragnaros was enraged as expected. "Fool, you let these worthless bugs into this sacred place, and now you've even led them to me. You disappoint me, Majordis, you disappoint me." After saying that, Ragnaros did not even wave his hammer. He raised his left hand high up. Every mage could feel a large amount of fire elements turning into streams of light and being forcibly pulled out of Majordomo's chest by Ragnaros. Majordomo screamed, "My flames, please don't take away my flames." Unfortunately, his power was bestowed by Lager. So was his life. When the Fire Demon King withdrew everything, he fell to the ground like a dead snake. He fell into the lava pool with a splash. Chapter 1171. Ragnaros turned his head and said angrily to Duque and the others, "Now it's your turn. You foolishly pursued Ragnaros' power, and now you're about to see it with your own eyes. Go to hell, mortals." Along with his thunderous voice, the Fire Demon King Ragnaros raised his huge red and black warhammer high. At this moment, the entire hero group remained unmoved, and only Duque snapped his fingers. Asterisk rumble, rumble, asterisk a rumbling sound that shook the entire lava world suddenly came from afar. Ragnaros was stunned. The sound came from afar and spread at high speed, and then even the ceiling of the rock cave where Ragnaros was located began to tremble. Under the illumination of the lava, the stone pillars and the load-bearing rock walls that supported the giant cave creaked and shook incessantly. Sand and stones fell one after another, as if this not-so-small space could collapse at any time due to the violent earthquake. Ragnaros himself was the largest fire elemental, and mortals would not be able to tell anything from his so-called expression. As the overlord of the elemental world who had once dominated the ancient Kalimdor continent, how could Ragnaros' power just be ordinary? "Mortal! What have you done?" His angry roar was accompanied by a copious amount of pressure that spread in all directions. Just his roar alone caused the rivers of lava on both sides of the stone path to react. It was as if every drop of hot lava in the surroundings had increased in temperature by a few thousand degrees after hearing his voice. The rivers of lava made a continuous gurgling sound, as if fanatics were loudly praising Ragnaros as the burning world, the master of fire purgatory, and the mighty name of the Fire Demon King. The melee professionals closest to the Fire Demon King were the first to bear the brunt. After all, most of them were battle-hardened and determined. As for Kalia and Sally, who were participating in a battle of this level for the first time, their faces were deathly pale. It was unknown whether it was because they were frightened or because the temperature was too high, but sweat poured down their foreheads like rain, gathering into small streams and sliding down their beautiful faces. Their eyes alternated between pitch black and red. Their wills were like a lone boat that had strayed into a river of lava, about to be engulfed by a fiery hell at any moment. Just as they were trying their best to hold the new epic-level staff, blessing, in their hands, encouraging themselves with the will of the priests to not succumb to the terrifying pressure of the Fire Demon King, the cold aura that had been protecting each and every one of them suddenly intensified. Yo! Ragnaros, the Fire Demon King. It seems like you haven't learned your lesson from your defeat in the War of the Sovereigns. Is it because you've been asleep for too long that you've forgotten that this is the era of mortals? Dooku played it down, but his voice was clear, causing the weaker members to tremble. The frost aura emanating from Dooku's body was so strong that even Queen Sylvie, who was slightly closer to him, could not stand it. Her face turned pale and her teeth chattered. Even so, the stubborn Servanas never left Duke's side even half a step. Sorry. Duke turned his head and said softly. He then quickly adjusted his magic circuits and the output of frost elemental energy. Jaina and Ronan looked at Duke in shock. This was the first time they had seen Duke unleash his frost elemental energy. After entering the molten core, he had reminded Ronan time and time again that an individual's strength was limited. There was no need to fight against the entire flame world with breaking dawn magic. Why did Duque take the lead to violate this iron rule? Did he dare to use mere mortal strength to fight against a demigod elemental king who had the terrain advantage? Duque drew his sword. Although it was a little inappropriate for the strongest pharaoh to slash someone with a sword, Duque had indeed drawn his sword. More than 50% of his mana was poured into this sword, and it shot towards Ragnaros' left arm like a bolt of lightning. A streak of icy cold light streaked across the sky. In his field of vision, it even more so split this scorching hot world into two. Amidst the sky full of sparks. Everyone, including the fire elemental servants hiding in the river of lava, saw Ragnaros' right arm suddenly explode into a sky full of sparks. Then, a hole large enough for a carriage to pass through appeared on the arm below his right wrist. There were traces of cold air on the hole, and frost elemental energy swirled there like an ice tornado, resisting and wearing away at the endless fire elemental energy in Ragnaros' body. The Alliance and Horde heroes all opened their mouths wide in shock. They could not understand what was going on. They could tell from the frost aura that Duque had used up a large portion of Duque's mana. To them, this was like hitting a rock with an egg. Why did Duque make such an unwise move? Ragnaros laughed sinisterly, but his smile froze in the next second. It was as if he heard the most inconceivable sound in his life. Duque's seemingly unplanned attack was just the beginning, and it was far from the end. After Duque's frost sword pierced through Ragnaros, the remaining force of the sword did not dissipate. It directly shot into a huge lava wall 250 meters behind the Fire Demon King. The cold light sunk deep into the wall, and there seemed to be no more sound. Just a moment later, a rustling sound came from the depths of the stone wall, as if something had broken. It was as if Duque's sword had touched a taboo in the stone wall. There was a loud bang, and a huge water column suddenly sprayed out of the deep cave, instantly lowering the temperature of the entire huge cave by at least 10 degrees Celsius. Duque waved the divine sword Gandalf. This time, the sword light was not as strong as before, but it was still sharp. Even if Lager wanted to stop Duque, he could not stop him from destroying the huge rock walls around him at high speed. When the originally solid rock layers crisscrossed and cracked, more water columns sprayed out. In this space that was originally surrounded by flames and rocks, everyone saw a strange scene that they would never forget for the rest of their lives. Countless water columns of different sizes sprayed a huge amount of water at the Fire Demon King like a sprinkler. However, before all the water reached his huge body, it was instantly evaporated by the high heat around the Fire Demon King. Clouds that were visible to the naked eye appeared around Ragnaros. It was water vapor that evaporated from his high temperature. The water vapor did not directly hit Lager. Instead, it slowly rose and circled above his head to form clouds. Duque smirked. Sorry. Great Fire Demon King, it seems that from today on, your molten core will become history. Chapter 1172. At this moment, there were huge cracks everywhere inside the molten core. They extended in all directions and separated to the left and right, forming a deep valley and two roughly parallel edges on the ground. When they spread to the sides of the lava rivers, the overflowing lava inevitably began to pour into the huge deep valley. However, at the bottom of the deep valley, there was also a huge amount of seawater spewing out. Fire and water fiercely intersected in every corner of the molten core, making loud sizzling sounds and rising water vapor due to the high heat everywhere. Impossible. How did you do it? Ragnaros finally let out a cry of surprise. Duque elegantly drew a semicircle from right to left with his hand and finally placed it on his left shoulder, giving a noble salute. This is the perfect combination of science and magic. From the beginning, Duque had never thought of relying on his 40 companions to rush into the molten core and kill Ragnaros. The molten core in reality was not that simple. At the very least, after so many months of travel, Duque's system had scanned traces of Ragnaros' power everywhere. How could a demigod of the fire element, who could spread his power all over his territory, be defeated just by killing his main body? Duque had to prepare for the worst. The entire molten core was the backing of Ragnaros, or even more exaggerated, the molten core was Lager, and Lager was one with this underground world of flames. Using the power of mortals to fight against the entire world of flames, what was the difference between this and an idiot sticking his penis into the ground and saying that he had forcefully pushed down the entire planet? Ignorant and ridiculous. What Duque wanted to do was to use the power of Hydraxia's water element and the help of the dwarven miners to destroy the entire molten core. It sounded like a fantasy, didn't it? But after careful research and comparison of the ancient Kalimdor continent and the other continents of the Azeroth, Duque came to a shocking conclusion. The 4 largest continents of the Azeroth were most likely floating islands or semi-floating islands that were not closely connected to the Earth's crust. Come to think of it, it was precisely because the Well of Eternity exploded that the entire continent was blown into 4 big pieces. That was how Kalimdor, the Eastern Kingdom, Northrend, and Pandaria came into existence. However, 10,000 years ago, these 4 continents were not in their current positions. This place was originally a deep sea that stretched as far as the eyes could see. As a transmigrator who understood the continental drift theory, Duque was sensitive to this. The foundations of the continents were not strong. It was very likely that when the 4 continents exploded, they bumped into a huge bulge at the bottom of the sea, which then stabilized and became what it was today. With the help of the Haitian water elementals, Duque finally knew that Ragnaros had activated a huge active volcano that was originally located in the deep sea. Through the eruption of the volcano's magma, a flame passage was created from the bottom of the Eastern Kingdom's continent all the way to the floating continent. Duque did not know if the passageway was as sturdy as he had imagined. Duque only needed to know that the area below the molten core was actually the ocean. What happened next was logical. The dwarven craftsman, who had once introduced a shield boring machine that was specially used for digging holes and dug an underground tunnel from Iron Stove Castle to Stormwind City in a few years, easily found dozens of shortcuts to the ocean with the help of Duke Hadasis and the other water elementals. Just as Duque and Ragnaros started fighting, the dwarven craftsman at each node detonated the last thin layer of rock, and then escaped through the prepared portal. While Duque and Ragnaros were fighting each other, 20% of the Fire Demon King's precious territory had been flooded. At this time, the powerhouses of the hero group finally knew why Duque had asked them to prepare the underwater breathing magic that the Haitian water elementals had prepared for them, as well as the underwater breathing equipment made by the gnome engineers. At worst, they would flood the entire molten core and fight a water battle with Ragnaros. Humans, elves, beastmen, and so on. It was inconvenient to fight a water battle, but Ragnaros was a fire elemental. Would he dare to fight a mortal in the water? The originally violent Ragnaros became even crazier. Mortal. I don't care who you are. I'll make you pay for this now. The moment Ragnaros roared, the huge fire demon Warhammer smashed down. The deafening rumble made people feel as if a mountain had fallen from the sky. Hey! Do you want to kill me? Have you asked for my permission? The short man Magni quickly activated deity's descent and turned into a large short man. Although his height was smaller than his width looked a little ridiculous, he was still very reliable as a true powerhouse. The axe and hammer in his hands, which were also made of silver metal, crossed in mid-air, firmly blocking the path of the hammer. Clang! With a loud bang, the collision of the three weapons created a huge shockwave, and Duke, who was hiding behind Magni, had his cloak fluttering in the wind. Duque was unmoved. Just this boldness of not even blinking was enough to make the onlookers feel deep veneration. Ragnaros, are you really not going to do anything? We're not ants that you can kill at will, but if you don't save your territory, your hundreds of years of effort will be wasted, Duque reminded Ragnaros bitterly. Duque was right. The entire molten core was a part of Ragnaros' body, and also the source of his power. It was an accident that the Iron Dwarf summoned him, but it was also inevitable. Ragnaros had long planned to return to the land. However, his power was not enough to burn the entire land, and it was not even enough to deal with the Eastern Kingdom. Hence, he had painstakingly accumulated the lava from the depths of planet Azeroth, and piled it up in the molten core. What was stored here was his energy, his ammunition, and his treasures. If he could quickly get rid of Duque and the rest, he could of course immediately turn around to deal with the crisis of the molten core being flooded. On the contrary, he could not quickly get rid of Duque and the rest, so he had to make a choice. No matter what choice he made, Duque would definitely not lose. Damn it! Ragnaros roared, and raised his left hand. The ground immediately rumbled. This was different from the passive rumbles from before. This time, Ragnaros actively changed the geographical structure of the molten core. Although the powerhouses were not too clear about the situation outside, they could still see a curved crack extending along the spiral flame pool. This was clearly a circular arc that seemed to separate the entire flame pool from the outside world. Chapter 1173. In the next second, the solid rock layers started to rise, as if they were going to form a dam. No, they were going to form a mountain that completely isolated the seawater, isolating the entire pool of fire from the outside world. It wasn't just here. Rumbling sounds could be heard from afar, and more mountains were rising. Ragnaros was trying to cut his losses and separate the various regions of the molten core to preserve as much territory as possible. Even Jaina and the other ladies who had participated in many battles couldn't help but cover their mouths, much less William and the inexperienced newcomers to the hero team. Moving mountains and rivers, using the rising mountains to resist the ocean that could extinguish all flames. This kind of earth-shattering power was definitely something that mortals could only look up to. The legendary power of the true realm of gods hadn't appeared on this land for tens of thousands of years. When almost all the ancient gods were sealed during the War of the Dominators, and when the last batch of demigods perished in the War of the Ancients, there were no more such legends in the mortal world, especially in the Eastern Kingdom. But today, even the most exaggerated power, which was only described in a few words in the oldest human poems, was finally displayed in front of mortals. Even the bravest and boldest mortal warriors didn't dare to imagine what would happen to them when they only had the power of mortals and faced such a terrifying fire-type demigod. However, there was no doubt that the mortals had the upper hand now. All of this was because there was a hero who could allow mortals to stand on equal footing with demigods and true gods, Duke Marcus. After months of preparation, the results were finally showing. Duque raised his head 45 degrees and stared at Ragnaros' figure, which was at least 15 stories tall. There was also a fanatical look on his face. It was the taboo excitement of being about to challenge authority and absolute power. This time, it wasn't the outsiders who were weakened by the Titan magic formation that stood in his way. Instead, it was a genuine and incomparably powerful local demigod. He wasn't an individual like Onyxia, but a top-notch demigod who was at the pinnacle of the demigod realm and controlled an elemental domain. Now, it was time for him, Duque, to personally blow the horn to attack. So what if Ragnaros could control the flames within a radius of thousands of miles? I can extinguish all your flames with a water attack. Logger, so what if you're a top-tier demigod? I used science and magic to block most of your power. Come on. Mad Fury. Attack. If you dare to transfer more power from your base in the land of fire, I will gain more. Duque's eyes shone brightly. His goal was no longer those artifacts. He had a higher goal, the power that Ragnaros had that could allow him, Duque, to step into the realm of God. After all, Ragnaros had just woken up from a deep sleep. He was still a little confused, but he immediately discovered the method Duque used to inform his men. Magic message. I, as the ruler of fire, declare that in my domain, arcane energy is forbidden. Luo Ning's expression turned ugly. He was shocked to find that the arcane elemental energy around him, which he used to communicate with at all times, seemed to be afraid of something and began to move away from him. Yo! Ragnaros, there are still nature, frost, shadow, holy, and so many other elements. Why don't you ban them all? Duque sneered and snapped his fingers for the second time. At this moment, the water elemental that had been standing beside Duque suddenly reacted. The water elemental of a mage was essentially a purer magical creature. It did not belong to the Hydraxia water elemental faction, but this did not stop the water elemental from using its own method to transmit information to Duke Hydraxis. Outside the fire pool, Duke Hydraxis let out a roar, and a huge waterspout rose from his arms. The waterspout that was hundreds of meters tall easily destroyed the earth barrier that Ragnaros had raised with his divine power. Bastard, Logger almost went crazy with anger. If it was any other day, he could destroy an ordinary leader of the water elemental formation with a single finger. One had to know that in the War of Domination, he had even killed the leader of the water elemental formation, Tidehunter Neptulin. Why would he care about a small leader of the water elemental formation? But now, there was still Duque and the others holding him back, and there was also the huge amount of seawater distracting him. He could not concentrate his power for a long-range attack. Ragnaros was really angry now. I have lost my patience. All of you can go and die. With that, he blasted Magni with Rage of Ragnaros. The avatar state could make the Shorty King immune to most fire damage, but the strong impact still caused Magni to roll away like a gourd. At this moment, Duque raised his right hand high and waved it down. This was the call for charge. Without any hesitation, another tall and burly figure rushed over at high speed and stood at the front of the team. Cowhead Chief Cain Bloodhoof. After putting on almost a full set of black iron fire resistance plate armor, he, who was already huge, now looked more like a war machine. The totem pillar that was emitting an icy blue water elemental glow swept horizontally and smashed heavily into Ragnaros's waist. Hey! Ragnaros! I'm here to greet you on behalf of your water elemental father. Old Cow laughed mockingly. Duke blinked. This old bull has mastered the taunt, divine skill to the point of perfection. Water and fire were incompatible. It was the same in Azeroth. How could Logger tolerate the accumulated hatred of tens of thousands of years and the fact that Logger had killed Neptulin? The fire elemental formation was originally very irritable, and Logger was easily angered. The Firelord Warhammer that was raised high up in the air had been targeted at the damned Duque 5 seconds ago. Now, it had become that annoying old cow. Bam! The giant Firelord Warhammer clashed with the totem pillar, and a huge ball of flames burst out. However, Cain was able to block the attack easily with the help of his superb equipment, which gave him a massive boost in strength. The old bull snorted and laughed. That big guy only has this much power. He. It doesn't hurt. It doesn't itch. If Ragnaros had legs, he would definitely send this damned cow flying with a kick. When he was about to attack, the Shorty King, who had rolled away and soaked in lava for a few seconds, had already turned into a silver stream of light and charged back with Intercept. Little burning man. Come come come. Let me make you into an eternal candle and put it in the toilet of the iron stove castle to illuminate shit. Duque was speechless. Could it be that one couldn't be a good warrior if they didn't have a sharp tongue? Chapter 1174. Taunting could be said to be a warrior's necessary skill. Apart from inexperienced fellows like William who only knew how to attack people, most of them had mastered the art of taunting that could destroy the world. Duque had the time to check the situation around him as he used his large frost arrow. The four Windrunner sisters kept knocking their arrows, throwing an empty quiver into the lava pool every 30 seconds. Ragnaros's body was too huge, but as a fire elemental chief-level creature, he didn't have any weak points. In other words, as long as he hit the target, he would be able to deal damage. For marksmen like the Windrunner sisters, they could even hit the target with their eyes closed. When there wasn't much pressure on the healers, Tyrant also joined in the shooting. Today, she didn't bring the famous white tiger with her. She was wearing a pure white priest robe and playing with her bow and arrow, which made her look a little out of place. On the other side, the group of pharaohs were making frost arrows, including the poor Ronin. He had Breaking Dawn magic power, but he was forced to use ice magic, which he wasn't familiar with. Behind Ragnaros, several phantom-like figures were rapidly restoring the daggers in their hands. From time to time, they would appear and disappear into thin air again. Ragnaros could sense that there were small bugs behind him that were hurting him, but it did not seem to be that serious. No matter how powerful they were, they couldn't compare to killing those two fellows who kept cursing him. Of course, there was also the wizard named Duque who kept breaking the rock barrier and drawing seawater to deal damage to him. Ragnaros remembered this guy from the mouths of mortals. Compared to the other mortals, this wizard who drew seawater to attack him was the one who dealt the most damage. Almost every pillar of water forced him to use large amounts of fire elemental energy to counteract it. To him, the fire elemental energy was both his strength and his life. He hated that fellow named Duque to the core. Hey! Duque! Can you not attract this big guy's attention? Why don't you carry this big guy? Magni cursed in the dwarven language. He knew that Duque could understand him. Duque rolled his eyes and silently cast a mirror image doppelganger while a ball of fire flashed, then activated invisibility, and walked away. The next moment, everyone saw Duque being sent flying by Ragnaros's flames and falling into the lava. It seemed to have died. Everyone also saw a shameless fellow wearing a priest's attire as soon as he appeared. He openly blended into the group of priests and praised, "Holy light. We can put up a fight with this idiot." At the same time, he cast 2 strong healing skills on Old Cow. As the second warrior to carry Lager, Cain was obviously not treated as well as Magni, who was the main tank. As the pressure on Magni's side was too great, Cain was easily neglected. Moreover, the healer was from the Alliance, so of course, he would save the Alliance members first. Cain felt a little bitter. Who asked him to have thick skin and strong vitality, heaven to the left, the warrior to the right? Who asked me to suffer? Tat tat tat. Hell, right? It's not like I haven't been there before. Even if the healers couldn't keep up, Cain quietly completed his task and shared the damage for Magni. When 2 powerful and pure holy lights crossed the void and descended on his head, stimulating the recovery of his body. Even the scabs on his hands quickly fell off. Cain was very touched. Huh? Where did this new bishop-level priest come from? Cain took the time to look back, only to see a certain impure being in the group of priests winking at him. Old Cow was speechless. A Breaking Dawn wizard actually knows holy light. Alright. I don't care if you're a part-time or full-time priest, as long as you can heal me well. Duque's cameo as a priest was the most beneficial addition to the team's healing lineup. After all, apart from Benedetta's, who was very reliable now but would be unreliable in the future, most of the healers in the team were newbies. This was especially so for Sally. She was often unable to heal because she was flustered. On the other hand, Duque had a plug-in made by the system and could easily see the HP of everyone in the team. Even if the entire team was very well equipped and filled with potions, they couldn't help but feel uneasy after a long time without receiving any healing spells. After observing for a few seconds, Duque decisively let Tyrande return to be the healer. Tyrande, you take care of Magni and Kane. Sally, if Tyrande is sent flying, you take care of Magni. Kalia, you're in charge of the melee team. If you see them getting burned, just cast recover. Benedictas, you're in charge of the ranger team and the wizard team. Briar Bearskin, you're in charge of the mobility team. If you see anyone injured for more than 5 seconds without healing, you go. It was a very chaotic scene. People were constantly being sent flying, and there were also idiots who were thrown into the lava river. When they floated up, their faces were covered in lava and they couldn't tell which way was north. If it wasn't for Duque occasionally switching back to a wizard and using the newly developed spell, Frost Hands, to pull up those who had fallen into the lava, a few of them would probably have died, such as Valera. She was once sent flying at the same time as Varian. She actually very heroically kicked Varian back in midair, and she flew far away and fell into the river, almost unable to get up. On the other side, Ragnaros had used almost all the skills he could: Rage of Ragnaros, Lava Blast, Elemental Flames, and all sorts of Fireball spells of different sizes that were comparable to level 5 Star Dawn wizards. However, the hero team's equipment was too good, and the group's fire resistance was so high that it scared him. Most of the time, when a large fireball smashed into them, they would only shake for a moment, or at most spit out a small mouthful of blood. Ragnaros was also angry. He raised his arms and shouted with a thunderous voice. "Come out, my slaves, and protect your master. I am invincible. Appear, slaves of the flames, your master is summoning you. Let the flames purify everything. Feel the flames of saffron." With these extremely classic lines, Duque knew that Lager was about to recruit underlings. As soon as Lager finished speaking, everyone in the hero team was dumbfounded, because they saw thousands of soldiers and horses. Hundreds and thousands of fire elemental elites emerged from the lava pool and charged at Duque's team at high speed. Each fire elemental was not huge, but there were many of them. That densely packed number, although Ragnaros was high and mighty like a cat toying with a mouse, with his arms crossed in front of his chest, as if he was watching a show, there were so many of them. The corner of Duque's mouth rose. Thousands of soldiers and horses. I have them too. Chapter 1175. This time, Duque didn't mingle with the priests anymore. He switched to a sorcerer and summoned a bunch of water elementals with a wave of his hand. It wasn't just him. Ronan, Jaina, and the other sorcerers quickly followed suit and summoned their own water elementals. Under normal circumstances, a sorcerer could only summon one water elemental at most. At the Breaking Dawn level, this limit would be lifted, but there would still be a limit. However, at this moment, everyone could only see water ripples around the sorcerers. Water elemental elites kept popping out from the semi-illusory spatial magic circle. In the name of Neptulin, the Tide Hunter, I shall purify you. They fearlessly charged forward and attacked their enemies with frost elementals. This scene was simply a continuation of the earth-shattering war of sovereigns from 25,000 years ago. You ungrateful water elementals! Do you still want to defile my holy land? Ragnaros was furious. He was really furious. Originally, when summoning the fire elemental to save the day, he would look high and mighty, standing there and watching his underlings fight with the mortals. But when he saw Duque shamelessly attracting his enemy, the Hydraxia Water Elemental Legion, he no longer cared about the restraint of the strong, and directly smashed down with his hammer. Clang! This time, it was Old Bull Kane who took the hit in place of Magni, who had temporarily cancelled his deity's descent state. Bastard! 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 You should all be burned to ashes. Not only did he attack the two most detestable warriors, Ragnaros actually swung his war hammer at the rest of the mortals in a very unruly manner. The formation was already a little messy from the impact of the flames, and it became even more chaotic. Lager's attack frequency wasn't high, but it was very powerful. When he used his height to attack the ranger team and healer team outside the two lava rivers, even Magni and Cain couldn't reach him. The four Windrunner sisters used all their strength to barely dodge the attack of the divine weapon Warhammer at high speed. Even so, the powerful flame shockwaves still burned their long legs to varying degrees. Although they could be healed and wouldn't leave any scars, Duque's heart still hurt. Mine. Mine. Those legs are all mine. Lager, you're courting death. Duque could not hold it in any longer. He gave Onyxia, who had been pretending to be a mage, a meaningful glance. The Black Dragon Princess understood immediately. Roar, an intimidating dragon roar resounded throughout the underground cave. What? Ragnaros's red eyes, which were condensed from super-high temperature flames, suddenly shrank. He had never imagined that there would be a black dragon in human form hidden in front of him. It was not an ancient dragon that he could easily kill, but a powerful black dragon with the status of a demigod. He immediately sensed that the black dragon in front of him was not in a complete state. It was obvious that he had been injured not long ago and had not fully recovered. Moreover, the black dragon's divine spark was much lower than his. However, a demigod was a demigod after all. Even if there was a difference in strength, he could still pose a sufficient threat to him. Ragnaros aimed his hammer at the dragon's head on the spot. This hammer strike was no longer a casual strike. Instead, it was swift and fierce with a certain degree of swiftness. It looked like it was going to hit Onyxia's head on her agile dragon neck. It also looked like it was going to hit her left wing, and it also looked like it was aiming at her front claws. If it was the Onyxia of the past, she would definitely be at a loss of what to do and would have to choose to retreat. But it was different now. Through the soul connection, Onyxia saw a strange trajectory in her spiritual world. It was the soul message that she sent back to Duque from the part of her soul that she offered to him. The possible attack trajectory of the Balrog's warhammer, which looked like it could smash her brains out, fell into her eyes. Moreover, as her movements changed, the trajectory would also change accordingly. This brand new battle strategy named Duque's Battle Simulation System seemed to have opened a door to her that she had never seen before. Powerful and effective. Just when everyone thought that Onyxia had to avoid the attack, the black dragon made an unimaginable special move. She retracted her left wing and used the claws at the tip of her right wing as a fulcrum to make a right side flip. When she narrowly let the huge flaming warhammer pass less than half a meter away from her dragon abdomen, her long dragon tail suddenly lashed out like a meteor hammer. The ice armor, which was already installed on the dragon's tail and made from the deep sea ice in the Hydraxia's water elemental territory, drew a huge arc in the air, and finally smashed on Ragnaros' head. Arg! The Balrog king cried out in pain. For the first time since the start of the battle, he retreated. His lower body that was wrapped in 3 layers of fire tornadoes supported his body and leaned back greatly, barely dodging the second attack from Onyxia's right hind leg. He managed to dodge it once, but he couldn't dodge it all the way. In order to dodge the Black Dragon Princess's consecutive attacks, his huge body was completely exposed in front of the hero group's melee combat team. Especially that group of bastard warriors, they did not hesitate to switch to their berserk mode and beat Lager up. In the blink of an eye, Ragnaros felt that his flame power had dropped drastically. But when he wanted to counterattack, Onyxia retreated. She didn't want to fight him head-on at all. Instead, she flew up and circled around him like a fly, harassing him without hurting him. Black Dragon. Isn't the dragon race known as the strongest race? Where's your manhood? Come on. Fight me head-on. Ragnaros was furious. He threw huge fireballs the size of a thatched cottage at the Black Dragon Princess. Unfortunately, it was of no use at all. Just like how Onyxia wouldn't waste her energy to use fire dragon breath on Lager, Lager's flames couldn't do anything to Onyxia, who also played with fire. The Black Dragon Princess was insanely resistant to fire. Although she wasn't immune to it, she would still be slightly injured if she was hit by a fireball. However, Logger's fireballs weren't dense enough. In particular, in the tactical simulation system that Duque sent, he could clearly see the path of every fireball. If she really showed signs of being hit, there was also a red warning arrow. If she was hit even with that, Onyxia would be getting worse and worse. He threw nearly 1,000 fireballs in one go and actually gave his opponent a 100% dodge. That wasn't a tiny mortal, nor was it a fake illusion. It was a black dragon that was 40 to 50 meters long. However, Onyxia twisted her body to the left while circling at high speed and tucked her abdomen to the right. She didn't even hit a single one. If Ragnaros had balls, he would definitely be having a headache right now. While Logger was entangled with the black dragon, the mortal heroes below silently struck gold. Unknowingly, they had reduced Logger's fire elemental reserves by a large amount. Chapter 1176. Ragnaros was furious. However, no matter how angry he was, how resentful he was, and how easily he lost his rationality, he was still an intelligent creature. Every second, more than 100,000 tons of seawater poured down on Logger. Every second, the molten core territory that gave him power was devoured by the seawater. A water elemental leader was wreaking havoc in his territory, destroying every water barrier he erected, but he couldn't do anything about it. At this moment, he was afraid. Really afraid. It wasn't a scream, but a more beastly roar. For the first time, Ragnaros raised the huge Balrog hammer high in the air, ignoring all obstacles around him, the two warriors' provocations, the Black Dragon Princess's guerrilla attacks, and the dozens of water pillars. His eyes were extremely empty, as if he was staring at no one. However, the more it was like this, the more uneasy Duque felt. Because according to the system notification, Ragnaros still had at least 30% HP left. Disperse. Duque ordered. However, it seemed to be a little too late, because Logger's entire body seemed to have collapsed, and her tornado-like lower body lay where Magni was supposed to be. In the next moment, her arms suddenly swelled, and the house-sized Balrog hammer came crashing down. Boom! Before the hammer hit the ground, it had already produced a deafening explosion in midair. It was as if the sun in the sky had transcended space, penetrated deep into the rock stratum, and landed here. Moreover, this time, Logger's target wasn't the thick-skinned warriors, or even the close combat team. She had been targeting the healers from the start. Not only did the few female priests turn pale, even Duque's face turned green. Not good. Once the healers were all wiped out, no one would be able to last more than 5 minutes in this fiery hell that Logger had created. The huge Balrog hammer was so dazzling that it rapidly enlarged in their vision. Even Benedicta's and Tyrande, who had already run a few steps, realized that it was impossible for them to escape with their own strength, let alone Kalia and Sally, who were frozen in place with fear. The only one who had a chance of escaping the range of the hammer was Brawl Baremantle, who had transformed into a leopard and was running away. Benedicta's mouth twitched. He looked at the hammer that was rapidly falling on his head and seemed to want to say something. In the end, he lowered his head dejectedly and waited for the judgment of fate. Woo! Sally burst into tears. She didn't know what to do. Duque. Kalia pursed her lips and prayed. If this was the last time she prayed in her life, then the person she prayed to would obviously be Duque. Tyrande was the only one who, in a moment of desperation, took out her Lightstrike strongbow, and shot out an arrow with a string attached to it. She did not know if she would make it in time. At the very end, a huge ice prism suddenly shot up into the sky, like a needle against an awn, and fiercely collided with the huge Balrog hammer. Perhaps this attack was a failure. That was because the frost element contained within it was far inferior to that of the Firelord's hammer. The ice prism was only able to resist the Balrog's hammer for about 1/10 of a second before it failed, turning into ice shards that scattered in the air. But it was also a success. In this 1/10 of a second, a white figure had already passed through the shadow of the Balrog hammer at high speed and pounced near a few priests. Ah! Sally screamed because a strong force pulled at her lower abdomen. This force was so strong that she almost squeezed out her dinner from the night before. Do. Kalia's face did not even have time to blossom in surprise before she felt the world spin around her, as if she had seen the sky and earth turn upside down. Only Tyron's dynamic vision was the best. She gave up on her escape route and turned to bow, making the most suitable posture to deal with the impact. Yes, Benedettas suffered the most. He suddenly felt a huge force on his butt, and then he flew out, falling painfully into a pool of lava to take a bath. Boom! Accompanied by an earth-shattering sound, the place where the hammer had landed splashed up a huge wave of lava that was more than 30 feet high. The solid rock layer rose up in circles like waves, and everything within a radius of several hundred feet was covered in splashing hot lava. Even though the heroes were all wearing fire-resistant equipment, they were still choked by the super-hot wave of fire and could barely breathe. No! Someone cried out. Was the healing team done for? Everyone stared at the place where the Balrog hammer had landed. However, the lava there was tumbling, and even the shape of the ground had changed. There were no survivors. Suddenly, Duque's voice rang out. What are you waiting for? Beat him up. Following the direction of the voice, everyone finally saw the situation of the healing team. They were on top of a protruding rock, and the youngest priest, Sally, was carried by Duque's right hand like a bag. On his right shoulder, Duque was carrying Queen Kalia. That round part was very eye-catching, and his calves were shaking, as if he could hear Kalia shouting something like, "Put me down." Duque's left hand was wrapped around Tyron's waist, and the night elf high priestess stared at Duque in fascination. Cough, cough. Brawl was more humane. He ran over to pick up Benedettas, who was almost shitting his pants from the lava. It was a mess, but at least no one was dead. The heroes all turned their heads and continued to attack Ragnaros in a frenzy. Damn it! Ragnaros was furious. He did not expect that his full-powered attack could not kill a mortal. On the other side, Onyxia weakly transmitted her voice to her master. This kind of attack. If you really want me to take it, I'll take it at most once. No need. Duke spat out a mouthful of turbid air and shook his head, expelling the messy thoughts from his mind. As expected, in a real battle, there were no bosses that only attacked warriors. Only idiots would specifically attack those with thick skin and flesh that could not be killed. When Ragnaros put away his arrogance, he became much more difficult to deal with. Duque roared, "Hydraxis, coming." When the first word was spoken, the voice seemed to be still in the sky. When the second word was spoken, the voice seemed to be right in front of them. Without any warning, the rock wall behind the ranged team that reached the top of the cave suddenly melted. The black wall suddenly turned the color of azure water. In less than 3 seconds, a water giant as large as Ragnaros appeared. Hydraxis! You have no right to stand in front of me, Ragnaros roared. Is that so? But I'm already standing in front of you. And I'm not the only one. Duke Hydraxis' eyes, formed from the purest essence of water, swept a glance at Duque. Those extremely human-like eyes revealed a look of gratitude. Chapter 1177. Duke Hydraxis' gratitude was sincere. If not for Duque, he would not even have the right to stand in front of Lager, as he had not even stepped into the realm of demigods. But now, he had the chance to avenge his dead master in the war of domination. Duke Hydraxis' heart burned with passion. Pfft! From an outsider's point of view, the water elemental Duke seemed to have shot out his entire arm towards Lager. Only the wizards could clearly feel that the Duke had actually used the water elemental energy he had extracted from the sea as a weapon. Duke Hydraxis' body was not that big. The two elemental giants, who were definitely monsters in the eyes of mortals, grappled with each other without any fancy moves. On the other side, Duque could finally catch his breath. He first put down Sally, whose body had gone limp, then hugged Queen Kalia's butt and put her down. Kalia's face was bright red, and she even secretly punched Duke's sturdy chest a few times in protest. However, she immediately tiptoed, as if afraid of being seen, and quickly kissed Duke's lips like a dragonfly skimming the surface of the water. Seeing Kalia's neck turn red, and she eagerly ran back to her healing position, Tyron secretly blew into Duke's ear. I really envy Kalia for still being able to maintain her pure heart. Sigh, unlike me, I've been led astray by you. Alright, I know what you want, little pervert. I'll come find you tonight. Tyrande was clearly upright and holy, as if she was saying something, but she just had to say such private things. Hearing this, Duque bared his teeth. Alright, seeing that the battle is still ongoing, I won't deal with you first. Seeing Tyrande nimbly run to another position, Duque turned to look at Sally, who was on the ground. Something was wrong. Sally was now holding her face with both hands. Her face was like a steamed prawn, white and rosy. It was obvious that she had heard what Kalia and Tyrande had said to him. This huge piece of gossip had clearly shaken Sally to the point where she couldn't think straight. Sally, actually, me and them, It's okay. I swear I'll keep it a secret. Sally suddenly stood up and looked at Duque with a resolute gaze. Unfortunately, I already have someone I like. Otherwise, I would probably also fall in love with a great hero like you, Lord Marcus. Ah! Before Duque could react, Sally had already leaned over and planted a light kiss on Duque's cheek. However, I still want to thank Sir Marcus. You're a good person. Then Sally ran away, blushing. Wait a minute. What the hell was that? A kiss from the nice guy card? Holy shit. If I didn't have a harem right now, do you believe that I wouldn't beat you up? Duque turned his head and squinted at the arena. He could clearly feel that the density of the fire elements around him was decreasing rapidly. For example, when Duque was saving people just now, he used something similar to icicle spell on his legs and used the frost element to propel himself forward quickly. The previous move required 100 mana points, but now it was 50. This was because the suppression of the fire element on the other elements had begun to weaken. The arcane elements that could not be used for a while could now be used. Ronan was the first to sense it and immediately threw a barrage of arcane missiles at Ragnaros. Not only him, but even Onyxia, who had yet to recover from her injuries, strengthened her offensive after Duke Hydasis became a big sandbag. Yes, Hydasis was weaker than Ragnaros and was at a disadvantage in the confrontation of water and fire elements. He could only bitterly make up for the gap in quality with quantity. However, with the help of the hero group and the Black Dragon Princess, the scales of victory quickly tipped towards the coalition army. And with him around, Ragnaros had no chance to deal a heavy blow to the healing team. Duque did not do much. At this point, there could only be two outcomes: either the Fire Demon King would fall, just like in history. Or, you bunch of degenerate and insignificant scum. You've tarnished my holy land. Do you think this is the end? Do you think I'll give my holy land to you as spoils of war? No. Never. Die. All of you, die. I'll use my last flame to burn all of you blasphemers to ashes. In everyone's field of vision, the gigantic Ragnaros had suddenly shrunk to about 1/3 of its original size. Even so, he was nearly 5 stories tall. Perhaps this was a form of weakness, but it was also a terrifying condensation. He was smaller, but the temperature was higher. The water elemental Duke Hydasis, who could previously rely on external water elements to replenish himself and fight Ragnaros back and forth, could not get close to the Fire Demon King now. The huge water bomb that was thrown out was completely evaporated halfway through its journey. Such a terrifying temperature could only mean one thing: the Fire Demon King was going to self-destruct. Death here was not the end for Ragnaros, whose soul was still in the land of fire. He would be able to regain his life in 10 years. But for the Alliance and Horde, it would be a complete nightmare if all these powerhouses died here. Kill. Mograine was the first to rush over with Ashbringer in his hand. The divine sword that had once killed thousands of immortals used the most dazzling golden light to offset the thousands of degrees of flames on Ragnaros's body. Count me in. The second one was Magni. After activating Deity's Descent, again, he charged over with his extremely high magic resistance. The third was Onyxia. As a demigod and a dragon, she had the ability to deal with this attack. To everyone's surprise, there was another person who dashed forward, Duke. He madly operated every magic circuit in his body. With Gandalf, the legendary sword of the white-robed sword saint, in his hand, his body turned into a comet-like stream of light. He soared from the ground like a baseball and stabbed straight at Ragnaros's chest. In the middle of the fire pool, Ragnaros was in great pain. But he completely ignored the attacks of all other existences, even Onyxia, who was also a demigod, because she lacked the courage to fight to the death. Only Duque. Not only did this human have the power to destroy him, but he also had an extremely strong and clear determination. This was not just a simple destruction. Ragnaros could clearly feel that Duque was almost domineeringly declaring that he was going to plunder the power that originally belonged to him. "Ant," Ragnaros roared. The ultra-high temperature of tens of thousands of degrees formed an almost absolute fire domain, and all the elements within the domain were engraved with his mark. Not only the fire elements, but even every drop of lava under his feet and every molecule in the air carried his will and attacked Duque at the same time. Chapter 1178. When an archmage reached the Breaking Dawn level, they could cast many spells that they didn't even dare to think about. Duque had once lifted the Windrunner sisters with icicles on the Solder Bridge. Now, he was lifting himself. Using only the icicles that he created in the air, Duque used them as fulcrum points to cast flash. In the eyes of others, the Sea of Fire seemed to have no way out. In Duque's eyes, it was just a group of elemental molecules that were arranged and moving in a regular pattern. The principle of flash was to use highly concentrated arcane energy to tear space apart and teleport the spellcaster's body. When Duque cast flash, the heroes with good dynamic vision could even see the golden sparks when the arcane and fire elements collided at high speed. The collision of elements didn't feel good. Duque's mind was clear, and he felt waves of pain. All kinds of sceneries flashed past his eyes at high speed. Screeching sounds that sounded like metal scraping against each other kept exploding in his ears. It was a clash of elements, a test of the toughness of the magic circuit, and a test of the mind. Almost every time he flashed 50 meters forward, the resistance in front of him would double. At first, it was just the difficulty of breaking through the mist, but in the end, it was like slamming his mortal body against the cement floor. The feeling of being crushed almost made Duque have a mental breakdown. He made it through. Whether it was his body, mind, or soul. Then, he saw Ragnaros, whose mouth was wide open in shock. After the last flash of magic, Duque crashed straight into Ragnaros' mouth like a shooting star and fell into Lager's chest. Wrapped in a thick layer of ice that kept forming and melting at high speed, Duque shuttled through Ragnaros' throat at high speed. It felt like he was taking a bath in lava. It was almost impossible to find the right way in that pitch-black place. Fortunately, Duque kept correcting his direction under the guidance of the system. 3 seconds. But it felt like 3 centuries. Even Grom, the bravest warrior of the tribe, opened his mouth in disbelief. Even Aurelia, Sylvanas, Sasha, and Tyrande, who trusted Duque the most, couldn't help but cry out in shock. Onyxia widened her mouth that was full of fangs, but all she inhaled was cold air. He had crashed into the body of a fire elemental demigod overlord. What was the difference between this and suicide? If it was Duque, who was known as the strongest hero of mankind, could he create such a miracle? Sure. Duque can definitely do it. Aurelia burst into tears. She didn't know when, but she, her sisters, and all of Duque's lovers were already holding hands. They were shocked by Duque's shocking actions and prayed for Duque's safety. Duque didn't disappoint anyone who supported him. At the moment when all the magic in his body was about to be emptied, he grabbed a huge core with one hand. Core of lava, one of the necessary materials to make fire-resistant equipment. But this time, what Duque grabbed was the core of lava of the fire demon king Ragnaros. This core gathered the purest power of Ragnaros, as well as the most violent part of his soul. It could be said that it was because of this core that there was this huge clone in the molten core. Arrogant. A puny mortal dares to touch the divine realm. A flame that seemed to be hundreds of thousands of degrees rose from the core, extending from Duque's arm. If Duque's first reaction was to cower, then everything would be over. But Duque still held the core tightly. Because the flame was the flame of the spirit. It was the final resistance of the elemental demigod. Perhaps Duque could start with the easy and difficult ones. Even if he wanted to pry into the divine realm, he could start with the simplest and weakest divine creatures and even snatch the divinity of his own mount. However, this probably wouldn't work. Divinity was the characteristic of a god, and it represented the greatest characteristic of a god or demigod creature. If Duque wanted to touch the divine realm, he had to find the most suitable path for himself. Duque used the system to scan Onyxia countless times, and the conclusion was that the divinity of the Black Dragon Princess was less than 10% compatible with Duque, because it was something of the giant dragon bloodline. Duque thought hard. In Azeroth, he was most comfortable with the three elements, fire, ice, and arcane. Next were the nature, holy light, and shadow, which belonged to the wind and thunder. It just so happened that he had to deal with Ragnaros, so devouring the clone of the fire demon king was the best choice, knowing that Ragnaros's real body was in the land of fire. High-end, grand, and classy. Plus, it was done in one go. If he couldn't even deal with a clone of the fire demon, then he could give up on his dream of becoming a god. Ragnaros's spirit backlash was completely within Duque's expectations. Hot. Super hot. Ridiculously hot. So hot that he lost all feeling. Duque saw his body being burned by the flames, his robe instantly turned to ashes, the hair on his hands and legs were charred in the blink of an eye, and even the ashes were swept away by the tongues of fire. His originally clean skin cracked like dry earth, then rolled up and was forcibly torn from his muscles. It was another wave of heart-wrenching pain. The next moment, it was his muscles. The originally slender and elastic muscles curled into a ball at high speed, and the bloody bones turned white at a speed visible to the naked eye, then charred, and finally, even his internal organs emitted an unpleasant stench as they were roasted into charcoal. Duque was dead. If the Duque in the spiritual world really believed that he was dead, then his soul would dissipate, and he would also die in reality. Unfortunately, Duque had already simulated such a violent illusion of a fiery hell no less than 100 times. When Ragnaros's will of fire was wreaking havoc in Duque's shallow spiritual isolation zone, Duque was also invading the core of Ragnaros and analyzing Lager's soul and will. The most powerful thing about Duque's system was naturally its multi-threaded manipulation, analysis, and calculation. If anyone could observe the spiritual battle between Duque and Ragnaros, they would be shocked to see that Duque had separated hundreds of millions of thin mental threads and invaded the core of the fire demon king from all directions. Although most of them were squeezed, attacked, burned, and destroyed by all kinds of mental and will defenses in less than a second after they invaded, there were also tens of thousands of spiritual threads that successfully invaded the core that contained Ragnaros' true will and began to destroy and collect intelligence like a rummaging machine. Chapter 1179. As an elemental demigod, how strong was Ragnaros? Duque had a rough estimate in his mind. Although Ragnaros was strong, it was impossible for him to surpass Malorn, who was known as the strongest demigod in the ancient war. According to the data collected in the ancient war, the system elf's estimate was more realistic. As the ruler of the land of fire and an elemental creature that had lived for tens of thousands of years, Ragnaros' strength was undeniable. Unfortunately, he was injured in the War of Sovereigns 25,000 years ago. He was beaten like a dog along with Si, Thun and the other ancient gods. If he was still at his peak, he wouldn't have needed to be summoned by the Black Iron Emperor and hibernate in the human world for hundreds of years. On the other hand, Ragnaros's power was like his flame domain. Although he could absorb power from natural flames endlessly, he didn't get rid of the savagery and chaos in nature. It was like using good steel on a knife's edge. How powerful could a weapon be if it was used indiscriminately? Therefore, although the power of the Fire Demon King seemed to be huge, the purity of the fire element was not high. At the same time, his use of all flame power had not changed in the past 25,000 years. He was still at the lowest level of borrowing, using quantity and brute force to win. This gave Duque a chance. No matter how much spiritual power Ragnaros used, how many seas of fire he created, and how many times he attacked Duque's spiritual world, Duque still, no. 4. Everything. Move. Duque pretended to be weak. With the help of the system, he contracted his own spiritual power to the extreme, allowing the opponent's spiritual flames to wreak havoc in their spiritual channels. After the analysis, Duque's lips curled into a mysterious arc. In reality, only 1/100th of a second had passed since Duque grabbed Lager's core. However, the horn of counterattack had already been sounded. At the moment, in Ragnaros's spiritual domain, every cluster of spiritual energy was filled with chaotic will with heat as the base. These wills followed the simplest rule of exclusion, attacking and eroding any spiritual energy that had nothing to do with flames. If Duque had chosen to go head-on against the elemental demigod, Duque would probably have been done for in the end, given his mortal spiritual energy capacity and the vast amount of spiritual energy of an elemental demigod. Although mental power could not directly interfere with reality, Duque's mind could not withstand the pressure. If it was forcefully distorted, denying himself and his knowledge of the world, Duque's final outcome would be mental death. Then his body would turn into an idiotic vegetative state for a moment, finally giving up resistance and being burned to ashes by Ragnaros's flames. However, Duque had an even more ingenious, or perhaps shameless, method. Duque's mental domain rotated at a high speed, constantly emitting all kinds of sounds that suited a certain fire demon king's taste. I am Ragnaros, the king of the world. I swear I will burn this hateful world to ashes. From today onwards, only the color of flames is allowed to exist. The first few sentences were normal, but then came the drama. I declare. This is a horse. Well, an illusion of Ragnaros pointed at a deer. I declare, this is white. Another small logger pointed at a black thing. That's right. The so-called lie would become the truth when repeated 100 times. Duque did not regard the will of Ragnaros's entire clone as a whole. Instead, he used the system to forcibly divide the entire will into different areas according to the activity level of the other party's will, and then repeatedly brainwashed each area. The key to everything was Duque's last sentence. I declare. The frost element and the fire element are one family. Just like that, Duque's will, which had the color of frost as its core, rushed straight in, unobstructed for even a moment. When it rushed into the core area, it forcibly crashed into the will barrier, and after touching Duque's will, it was also died. Like a rolling snowball, it kept wrapping all the neutral or traitorous wills around Duque's will. Then, it mercilessly collided with the strongest will of Lager. The shattered will of Ragnaros was like sparks flying out of a blacksmith's shop, dancing bit by bit, and finally fading away like a meteor. More white snow shone like stardust as it surrounded Duque's will, and it looked like it was covered with countless frost shields. The snowball of Duque's will became bigger and bigger, constantly rejecting the strongest will of fire, and at the same time, absorbing all the mental power that could be absorbed. The mental power that was replenished was like the overturning of the sea, eliminating all the gullies in front of it. In the end, as Duque's will rotated at high speed, all the low-level willpower, and all the willpower that was still blazing, were all excluded as impure. The tens of thousands of spiritual threads that were left in Duque's remaining began to proliferate at high speed in the core of the Fire Demon King's magma, and soon turned into billions of spiritual threads again. Countless spiritual threads ground the flames in the core, washing away all the existence that was regarded as impure. Again and again, round and round. Finally, after continuous low-level will of fire was purified and replenished into Duke's mind, Duke's will became the absolute master in the magma core. In the outside world, Ragnaros's huge body bloomed with the most dazzling light since the start of the battle. Almost everyone thought that the clone of the Fire Demon King was about to self-destruct successfully. At that moment, tears welled up in the eyes of many heroines. Was it fear? Regret? Resentment? Or unwillingness? Only they themselves knew. However, 1 second passed. 2 seconds, 3 seconds, the earth-shattering explosion that they imagined never came. Ragnaros's posture froze. The temperature froze. It was as if even the blossoming light froze. In the end, what sounded was Duke's chuckle. But, that's it. In response to Duke's laughter, the enormous figure that was still 5 stories tall suddenly exploded. It wasn't an explosion, but purely the rise of the last heat when the fire in a furnace was extinguished. With a puff, it expanded a little, and the body that was still emitting high heat just now disappeared without a trace. Only the shockingly huge fire demon Warhammer that had lost its master was left, and it crashed into the magma pool. In midair, a young man in a blue and white robe slowly floated down with a smile. Duke? Dozens of faces exclaimed in the same pleasant surprise. Yes. Duke survived. In a more powerful state. The transcendent waves that were vaguely emanating from his body told everyone that he seemed to be some kind of transcendent being. Chapter 1180. Had Duke become a demigod? No. To be precise, he was now the owner of divinity. If one had to explain the difference between before and after he had divinity, it would be that previously, Duke had only connected his magic circuit to the surrounding elemental domain almost permanently. He could generate almost unlimited power like a nuclear power plant, or in other words, produce large amounts of magic at high speed. Divinity did not increase the quality and quantity of magic, but it gave Duke a higher level of understanding. If the fire magic in this world was described as a pyramid, then it would be impossible to see the top of the tower at a glance. Now that he had the divinity of the famous fire demon King Ragnaros, Duke suddenly had a sense of clarity, as if he could see the top of the tower at a glance. Of course, the pyramid was transparent, but it did not mean that there would be no obstacles along the way. Perhaps there would be all kinds of invisible but tangible glass walls blocking the way. Now, Duke could firmly believe that as long as he kept moving forward, he would definitely reach the end. This strange sense of anticipation filled Duke's whole body. The flames that would have attacked Duke, or even hurt Duke, were now obediently crawling in front of Duke. The fear was accompanied by a sense of docility, and it was hard to imagine that this was the most violent fire element in the world. Ha! Disperse, all of you, Duke said softly. With just one sentence, the fire elements wandering around the pool of fire seemed to have a human nature, and quietly retreated in understanding. The flames that were wrapped around Duke a moment ago flowed away like quicksand between Duke's fingers. The high rock layers slowly descended, as if they were just some kind of mechanism that was being restored. The boiling river of lava a moment ago calmed down, and it was as quiet as a stream in the forest in summer. In the pool of fire, a fountain of lava suddenly rose. It was not as hot as others imagined, but instead, it lightly pressed against the sole of Duke's foot like the courtiers greeting their king. The lava that was thousands of degrees Celsius quickly solidified, forming a huge ladder in less than 3 seconds for Duke to slowly descend. This is... Wajin opened his mouth wide, and his face was filled with undisguised shock. When Duke landed on the ground, Luo Ning was the first to greet him. He bowed deeply and said loudly, "Congratulations, Master, for conquering the fire element." He became the master of the Molten Core. Molten Core Conqueror Duke. This name was so resounding that it deeply shook the hearts of every expert. This was especially so for William and Magni, who were extremely shocked. As the king of the Stormwind Kingdom, William had to read hundreds of reports about the burning steppes and the scorching land every year after he succeeded the throne. He was afraid that this terrifying neighbor would suddenly become furious and destroy the Stormwind Kingdom's territory. As one of the direct victims of the War of the Three Hammers, the bronze-bearded dwarves led by Magni had been monitoring Ragnaros, their terrifying new neighbor, for hundreds of years. They had not had a single day of peace. The War of the Three Hammers had caused too much damage to the dwarves. The Dark Iron dwarves had courted death and become slaves. The Wildhammer dwarves had also had to give up their ancestral territory because of the collapse of their old nest, Grimbatal, and had to cross the strait to a place as far away as the Eagle Nest Mountain. Hence, the change of ownership of the Molten Core had a huge impact on them. But the one who valued the Molten Core more was Duke Hadassus. Duke Marcus, your promise, Duque smiled and said, I have always kept my promises, in the past and in the future. Since Ragnaros's clone has been defeated, his soul in the fiery land has also suffered heavy damage. Hence, the Molten Core should not exist. Otherwise, it will become a breeding ground for him to recover his strength and nourish evil. Duque raised a finger and said, within a month, I will personally hand the Molten Core to Hadacia to destroy. Hadassus bowed and saluted. Duque glanced at the lava pool behind him and gently raised his hand. After a wave of lava, a small island suddenly rose from the originally unfathomable pool, and a path made of rocks floated up. When Duque covered the path with a layer of frost and let the temperature cool down, everyone saw a huge treasure chest the size of a small house in the middle of the island. This is... Every expert felt their breathing quicken. This was the treasure of the Flame Demon King, Ragnaros. Everyone surrounded it. There was no dispute, no scramble. Everyone tacitly lined up on the right, and the small area on the left was for the tribe's men. Duque snapped his fingers, and as if it had a response, the huge chest opened by itself. The dazzling brilliance that suddenly blossomed from inside made everyone exclaim in admiration, wow, wow, wow. Duque was the first to pick out something that looked like an eyeball. Duque smiled at the tribe's side and said, Eye of Savras, this thing is a set with the skull of imprisonment of the Wind Seeker, that we obtained earlier. It corresponds to a one-handed divine longsword. Watkin nodded. Who asked them to be late? This set had nothing to do with the tribe. Duque then threw the Eye of Savras to Gavin Rad. Boss. I love you to death. Come, give me a kiss, just one kiss. The shameless Gavinrad actually rushed up and made a bear hug and kiss gesture. Duque only said one word to him, scram. Then he kicked the guy into the lava to take a bath. Ah! Boss is buying lives. Gavinrad screamed, but no one cared about him. The female priests all giggled as they watched the guy miserably use the paladin's invincible to roll to the shore in the distance. Duque ignored the clown and looked at the tribe's side. Actually, there is another divine weapon here. Seeing Duque walk to the side of the island and pat the hammer that was the size of a small house, the tribe's masters immediately understood. The hammer can shrink. Watkin asked. Of course, this hammer is called Hand of Savras the Balrog Ragnaros. Its essence is actually a collection of the purest fire elements. I can help it become a two-handed hammer. If the tribe wants it, the Alliance can give it to you. As soon as Duque's voice fell, the leader Grom refused immediately, we don't need anything. Our lives were saved by the Alliance. Even if we have to pay with our lives, we won't even frown. Kane and Watkin nodded. Alright then, we'll just pick some, and the rest will be for you as souvenirs from the Molten Core battle. Chapter 1181. In fact, the division of loot this time was a matter of mutual modesty and necessity. This was because none of the strong men of the major tribes used hammers, let alone two-handed ones. Grom naturally used Bloodhowl. Kane's faith determined that he only used totem poles or rune spears. Wajin used spears, various sticks, or whirling blades. Rexer used double axes. Moreover, the few powerhouses of the tribe had fought in the Battle of Mount Hyjal, and were equipped with even more powerful Mount Hyjal equipment. Finally, the tribe took some individual pieces of equipment as supplements. Wajin kept Shadow Strike, a long-handled weapon that the Paste people called Dung Fork. Rexer got two two-handed axes, Spirit Shredder and Spine Reaper. To the burly Rexer who had ogre blood, a two-handed axe the size of a human was only a one-handed axe. The Alliance still gained the most. Firstly, the Alliance sent more people. Secondly, it was the Alliance who planned to summon the water elemental from Hydraxia. Thirdly, the tribe owed the Alliance a huge favor. Varian and the other two, Sally Whitemane, Master Craftsman Jurbin who had not participated in the battle before, and Queen Kalia were the ones who gained the most. They came in with one or two pieces of epic equipment mixed with a large amount of superior equipment. After fighting the Molten Core, everyone had a full set of epic equipment. Another person who gained a lot was Magni Bronzebeard. As Duque had absorbed Ragnaro's divinity and even temporarily taken over control of the entire Molten Core, Duque could shrink the Balrog hammer to a size that dwarves could use. At the same time, because of its nature as a fire amalgamation, the hammer could also grow slightly with Magni's body when he used Avatar. For someone like Magni, who was known as the #1 warrior in the Alliance and had long learned the warrior skill, Titan's Grip, this was definitely the best weapon for someone who could hold two two-handed weapons with both hands. According to Magni, if he used more sulfuron iron ingots, obtained from the Molten Core, this Balrog hammer could be further strengthened, and it could even be upgraded by half a grade. But that was already a story that the dwarves and hammers could not tell. Seeing that everyone had almost divided up Ragnaro's treasures, Duque raised his hands high. Everyone, please listen to me. The noisy crowd quieted down in an instant. Regardless of race, Alliance tribe, or water elementals, they all looked at Duque, the leader of the allied forces. Thank you all for your hard work. Once again, we have solved a crisis that could lead to the end of the world. The crowd could not control themselves and burst into cheers. Long live! Long live the Alliance! Loktarogar! Plop plop plop. Duque waited for the excitement from the various races to subside before he continued, although I really want to convey the joy of victory to the various races, to the ears of every citizen of every kingdom or clan, I'm sorry, but we still have an evil black dragon above us. When Duke said that, Onyxia blushed, which was a rare sight, but she pretended to be nonchalant. The war is not over yet. Please note, this is not just for the sake of our allies, but also for the peace of the Alliance and the world. The current Black Dragon King, Nefarian, was never one to settle down. I think, in a few days, we will know what trump card he is so proud of. When that time comes, it will be the day when our allied heroes will march towards Blackwing's nest. But before that, please trouble everyone to stay here for a few more days. Duque's request was a little strange. The smart guys had already figured out that Duque was actually digging a hole again. From the prior analysis, they already knew that the relationship between Nefarian and Ragnaros was not close at all. Even the so-called allied forces from before were actually negotiated between Nefarian and Majordomo Executus behind Logger's back. Nefarian was definitely happy to see the Alliance and Horde attack the Molten Core. It would be best if both sides suffered losses. However, a great victory for the allied forces was not something Nefarian wanted to see. Unfortunately, the Black Dragon King could not spy on the situation in the Molten Core, so he could only rely on guesses. It was not an exaggeration to say that the initiative had now fallen into the hands of the allied forces. Since Duque asked everyone to rest, everyone was willing to listen. The terrain of the Pool of Fire was too terrible. After a brief discussion, everyone decided to return to the camp where Lucifron was the earliest to rest. This was because the facilities there were the most complete. Before returning, there was a small incident. Lord Duque, please save me. I've already done everything perfectly according to your request. please take pity on me and let me become your slave. I just need a little bit of fire. Really, just a little bit. The muscles on Duque's face were stiff. When everyone was preparing to retreat, this guy who climbed out of the magma was almost cut down by Mograine's sword. He only stopped at the last moment. Of course, Duque would rather Mograine's hand be dirty and cut this guy down with one hand. No one would have thought that Majordomo Executus, who had surrendered to the Allied forces and became a traitor, was actually still alive. Why don't you King die? Then I can legitimately shed some crocodile tears for you. It would have been fine if Duque had not absorbed the divinity of Ragnaros, but the divinity that Duque had absorbed could create a special fire seed that was enough for a fire demon to survive. Well, now the blame was on Duque. Duque glanced and found that Onyxia was secretly tugging at the corner of his skirt. Of course, she would not care about the life or death of an enemy leader. But that was a guy who had surrendered and then had his remaining value squeezed out of him. That was a different story. Duque was willing to bet that if he dared to burn the bridge after crossing it and kill Majordomo, Onyxia might have other ideas later. Duque had an inscrutable look on his face as he gently raised his chin. Hey! You're not dead. Well, a promise is a promise. Since you have done what I asked, I will accept you. From today onwards, you will guard my mage tower for me. Your status in the future will depend on your performance. Duque gently flicked his finger, and a very weak thing, almost like the flame of a lighter, flew straight into the middle of Majordomo's eyebrows. But it was this flame that made Majordomo feel relieved. For a fire demon leader, only a fire seed that could be used as the core of the flame was the key to their survival and reproduction. In the past, only Ragnaros could give this thing, but now there was Duque. Master Marcus. Thank you very much for your gift. Now, I will take you to Ragnaros's secret treasury. Huh? Chapter 1182. There's such a good thing. Not to mention the others, even Duque was overjoyed. In Duque's memory, the molten core was of the highest quality. It was just two divine weapons, the wind sword and the Balrog hammer. These two items were enough to make warriors, thieves, and paladins go crazy. They had nothing to do with Duque, who was the pharaoh. Majordomo's words made Duque's eyes light up. The fire demon in front of him was a coward. Perhaps he would not be able to count on his loyalty in the future. But it was undeniable that this guy was a rare talent in management. Oh, he was a freak. He was very smart. He could manage the molten core, which was full of retarded monsters. He could even decisively command the army to attack the Alliance's powerhouses after analyzing the enemy's strength. When Majordomo was an enemy, Duque naturally wanted to kill him as soon as possible. But when he became Duque's servant, it was a different story. Duque knew very well that Majordomo had offered this treasure that was not recorded in any historical records, even though he knew that his master was the pharaoh. Duque did not have to be polite to this guy who sold out his master for glory. He raised his chin and said, "Lead the way." Majordomo was unexpectedly overjoyed. He kowtowed repeatedly and said, "Thank you, master." "Thank you, master." Duque was a little embarrassed. Could this be the legendary saying, if you can't invite AB*TCH, you have to kick him away? After Ragnaros' clone was destroyed, Majordomo had no way out. The violent fire demon king would never let a traitor go. The only one who could protect him was Duque, the fire demon king's killer. Duque, who had made up his mind, followed Majordomo to the north of the pool of fire under the escort of a large group of heroes. This was the deeper part of the pool of fire. Majordomo chanted an incantation, and the entire boulder melted, revealing a huge slope that led downwards. Torches lit up along the way, and upon closer inspection, one would be shocked to discover that each torch was made from the arm of a fire demon. The slender fingers that were spread out in the air were holding a dazzling ball of flame. Duque could clearly feel that Kalia, who was secretly holding his hand, tensed up for a moment. It seems that the fire demon clan is also having a hard time. Duque sighed softly. Majordomo bowed deeply. The fire demon race desires master's mercy. A clan? Hee hee. Interesting. After walking for less than a kilometer, everyone followed Majordas to a huge fire magic array. Majordas quickly dispelled the magic array and bowed to invite Duque in. Duque looked around. Although he did not feel that there was any danger, he still left 2/3 of his people outside just in case. This included Ronan, Jaina, and Tyrande. Lilith aside, the 3 Windrunner sisters followed beside Duque, looking very excited. Finally, Ragnaros's secret treasury was opened in front of everyone. Like a beautiful virgin who had been captured, no matter how shy and unwilling she was, she had no choice but to kneel in front of Duke and the other thugs and sing her surrender. Almost the instant the treasure vault in the middle of the magic array was opened, a system notification popped up in his vision. Duque could not stop laughing. Ha 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 ha. Ha 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 ha. Duque was overjoyed. He was so overjoyed that he even forgot himself and hugged Queen Sylvanas, kissing her passionately. Yo! Sylvanas. Weren't you always complaining that you didn't have a good flying mount? The mount is here. Everyone, don't just stand there. Come and pick. There's only a limited number. What appeared in front of everyone was a large pile of eggs and what looked like sleeping puppies. If these puppies were normal dogs, and these eggs were normal birds, it would be a joke. Every dog here was a small molten hound that could be used as a mount. Every egg here was the famous Milligazer's scorching egg. When this thing hatched, it was the famous pureblood firehawk, second only to the phoenix in terms of popularity. Back then, many elven players fought to the death, whether it was to gather money or farm, just for a chocobo. Chocobos were nothing compared to this eye-catching firehawk. With the pureblood firehawk, chocobos could be taken to the slaughterhouse and added to the dishes tonight. Come, come, come. Cut your finger and let a drop of blood in it. As long as it remembers your taste and soul, the pureblood firehawk will never betray you. Duque's onyxia had already made everyone jealous and jealous. All male compatriots knew that onyxia was an incomparably flashy, capable mount. The other conditions were hard to come by, but at least it was eye-catching and could fight. Now, these dozens of firehawk eggs completely satisfied the needs of all the strong people. Everyone present was knowledgeable. When the first person summoned a pureblood firehawk bathed in flames, everyone knew that it was much better than the griffins and wyverns. The blazing flames were like a gentle breeze. It felt warm, but it wouldn't hurt the owner at all. Grom took off his black iron equipment set and found that the firehawk, which was connected to his soul, wouldn't hurt him either. Apart from the pureblood firehawk, there were also the smaller molten hounds. This kind of two-headed lava hound, when used as an enemy, had a set of skills that would give experts a headache: Earth Trample, Primordial Despair, Primordial Frenzy, and a total of 8 disgusting skills. After Duque gave them some fire seeds, these small molten hounds still retained some of their skills. Basically, they only had 1 or 2 random skills. Although the molten hound was no match for the original molten hound, its 30-yard radius, high attack power, defense, and vitality made the molten hound mount the best choice for charging through enemy lines. Whether it was the pureblood firehawk or the molten hound, they didn't need to be fed. Fire and high temperature were their life forms. According to Majordomo, it would be best if they could find lava for them to bathe in. If that wasn't possible, they could make a bonfire for them to roll around in. That would also be their 3 meals a day. Duque did some calculations. Apart from Northrend, there really wasn't any place these 2 mounts couldn't go. If the mount was a small surprise, then the 3 pieces of high-grade equipment that were supposed to only appear in the Land of Fire were a pleasant surprise. But the biggest surprise was a strange ball of fire. Master, as long as you place your divine artifact sword inside, you can quench your divine artifact once again and add additional attributes. Chapter 1183. Duque's eyes narrowed into a straight line. In his retina, the system elf labeled, Eternal Fire, deeply stimulated Duque's eyes. Eternal Fire, used by a divine blacksmith, it can be used to refine semi-divine and divine weapons. 50% chance of no change, 20% chance of upgrade, 20% chance of mutation, 10% chance of downgrade. Other than Majordomo, Magni and a few others were standing beside Duke. Majne suddenly rushed up, extremely agitated. He shook Duque's body violently, almost shaking Duque to the point that he almost fell apart. Duque. Duque. This looks like the legend passed down by us bronze-beard dwarves, the eternal fire, that can forge divine weapons. Can you give this to us bronze-beard dwarves? Just a little bit. Just a little bit. Majne was like an old hen protecting its chicks. He also came up and stood between Majne and the flame. Wait, this thing is now my lord's, my lord. Duque flicked Majne's forehead with magician's hand, sending the eager fellow flying. Duque was very magnanimous. I promised Hydraxis to drown the molten core anyway. Rather than letting the eternal fire rot in my wizard tower, why not keep it in the furnace castle? Duque could see through the system's analysis. Eternal Fire looked high-end and elegant, and the title of Eternal Fire was quite scary. In reality, the things that came out of the molten core all had the same characteristic: they were useless if they were not replenished from time to time. That's right. An inextinguishable flame. The question was it only useful as a lighter? Mages themselves were the biggest human lighters. Instead of giving it to others, why not generously give it to your own people? The Furnace Castle was a magical city built on top of an active volcano in the snowy mountains. The Bronzebeard dwarves had purposely chosen to build their city in the belly of the mountain where lava flowed endlessly. Since the Alliance had such good relations, giving it to the Bronzebeard dwarves was the best choice. Just as Magni was about to beg, Duque agreed. He was overjoyed. Oh, my dear Duque, you are indeed the best brother of us dwarves forever. Magni jumped up with a intercept, opened his stinky mouth, and kissed Duque with his prickly beard. Scram, I'm not interested in men. Duque tried his best to resist, but the bastard warriors were all bastards with explosive muscle strength. How could a mere pharaoh like Duque resist? Help, can someone save me? Who can help me get rid of this guy? However, no one responded to Duque's cry. The guys around him usually called each other brothers, but none of them came to the rescue at the critical moment. Even Duque's own woman laughed heartlessly. Damn it! The world was so cold. In the end, Duque was trampled, and was kissed on the cheek by that bastard bearded Magni. Humph. I'll just treat it as if I've been licked by some uncute pet. In fact, it was easier than Duque had imagined to do the second quenching. When Magni brought out the Hand of Savras Ragnaros to forge, those unfavorable chances were completely eliminated. Most of the heroes secretly returned to Stormwind City to rest. Only Duque and his women were left to accompany Duque. They watched Magni hammer Duque's Gandalf from afar as he chatted with Duque. The cold ice barrier on Duke's body completely isolated the raging heat. Inside the barrier, it was as though it was two different worlds. Illyria put on a pure white dress, which was rare for her, and walked down the aisle with the hem lifted. This was still the molten core, after all. If she didn't want her dress to be torn by the hot rocks on the ground, she had to walk carefully. Aurelia, who was dressed like a noblewoman, didn't look like the valiant female ranger at all. The scorching light from the lava shone on Aurelia, and the fiery red light almost dyed her dress red. Why are you suddenly in the mood to wear this? Duke laughed. We won't be going against Nefarian for a while anyway. Isn't it good to use this rare free time to dress up? Yes. Of course. Duque gently hugged the female ranger's soft and supple waist, and let Aurelia sit on his thighs. Duque leaned over and took a deep breath of his lover's body fragrance. So fragrant. What, you've been sniffing for more than 10 years, isn't it enough? When she wasn't fighting, Aurelia was a true noblewoman. At first glance, she looked more like a high elf noble than a ranger. Not enough, not enough. Of course not. I still want to sniff for the rest of my life. Duke deliberately rubbed his chin, which had some stubble on it, on Illyria's smooth, white neck, causing the female ranger to pant. Ah! Annoying, it's too itchy. Plop plop. Duque couldn't help but lick Aurelia again. I'm warning you. I don't want to mess around with you in front of outsiders. Ugh. Duque had to suppress the violent thoughts of Duque's godly sword. Duque, you've changed a little. When I first met you, I always felt that although you had unparalleled foresight and vision, I always felt that you were being chased by something scary. You kept pushing yourself and wouldn't stop for even a moment. Now, I more or less understand some of your worries. The Burning Legion is indeed a very scary existence. However, I feel that you're a little more comfortable now. Duque gently interlaced his left hand with Aurelia's right hand. That's because I've foreseen many tragedies. Fortunately, with our efforts, we've avoided many tragedies. That's why the Alliance has the confidence it has today. Duque looked around, and every woman who was chatting with their sisters smiled at his gaze. That's right. Without his and everyone else's efforts, many of these women would have died tragically. Aurelia would have disappeared. Sylvanas would have become the forgotten queen. Elucia would have become an undead and wandered around Scholomance. Kalia would have gone into seclusion due to a broken heart. Jaina would have been cursed by the world for selling her father out. In history, the only ones who had a good reputation were probably Kalia, Tyrande, and Sasha. Duque. Aurelia suddenly leaned over to Duque's ear and whispered in the whisper of the wind, "Do you want to consider having a child?" Ugh. Duque was a little confused. Just then, Magni suddenly shouted, "Ha ha ha! It's done! A new godly sword!" Chapter 1184. He raised a strange longsword high in the air. It wasn't just Duque. Even the knowledgeable Tyrande had never seen such a strange sword before. Before this, Duque's, Gandalf, was a pure holy sword. But now, the sword had obviously mutated. The intense and blazing sparks danced around the sword, and the originally slender sword body became much thicker, turning into a slender spiral shape, looking like a very long nail. But on top of the spiral, there was a circle of holy and a circle of shadow. The two powers appeared harmoniously on the sword, and the girls were stunned. This is... Aurelia was a little confused. The elves were sensitive to magic, and the three Windrunner sisters, including her, could clearly feel the light of expelling evil and the extreme pressure from the sword. I knew it. Tyrande held her face and sighed. It was hard for her not to be reminded of what happened to Duke in the Battle of the Ancients. He pretended to be a Void Lord and ended up getting her into trouble. Magni laughed. Don't look at me like that. I used the soul imprint that Duque left on the sword to expand its potential. That's how it ended up like this. Duque walked forward slowly and held the hilt gently. A warm and familiar feeling came from his palm. His thoughts involuntarily extended from his palm to the sword. Suddenly, the memories of the past surfaced unconsciously. Ever since he transmigrated, he had killed many evil beings. He pierced through Medivh, who was possessed by Sargeras, stabbed Archimonde, who was climbing the world tree, to death, pierced Ragnaros's throat. The ultimate embodiment of all kinds of fatal attacks, like the last hit was this spiral-shaped blade. A godly sword born for assassination. On the other hand, Duque was never an absolute messenger of light. He had a heart of light, but he didn't mind doing things in the shadows. He did it for the future of Azeroth. There was light. There was darkness. There was no absolute line, and there was no absolute good or evil. This new divine sword was powered by magic, and it was a perfect representation of Duke's characteristics. Magni clapped his hands. Yo, Duque, I can sense that this sword's name should be Song of Light and Darkness. But I don't know if I'm wrong, but I feel that this strange godly sword has a hidden name. But knowing this name should be your privilege as the owner of the sword. Duque's face twitched. The data pouring down from his retina had already told him the truth of the matter. That's right, he knew the name and data of this sword. Do you think that with a master who constantly forsakes his moral integrity, the divine sword would still have such a high-end, elegant, and artistic name like Marcus Song of Light and Darkness? Of course not. The real name of the godly sword is Duque's Integrity. When he saw the first line, Duque wanted to spit blood on the screen. Duque's Integrity, Grade 2 Godly Sword, growth limit is Grade 9. A godly sword that was split from the legendary top Grade 9 godly sword, Quell, Zerum. It was originally a sword of absolute light and absolute kindness. But because the previous owner, Anduin Lothar, had a disagreement, it split into two swords. The main sword inherited by Turalian inherited absolute light and justice. The secondary sword owned by Duque is further transformed according to the will and soul of its owner, Duque. It has become a special godly sword that is completely different from its predecessor. Duque's Integrity, attack power 1 to 999. Each attack has an additional 220 fire damage. One-handed sword, soulbound to Duke Marcus. Duque's Integrity, special effect 1, Demon Slayer. As the owner of the godly sword, you are the most powerful demon killer in the world, the nemesis of evil. You have destroyed billions of evil beings. The weakness of evil is not a secret in front of you. When facing demons and evil creatures, the attack power is increased by 1000%. At the same time, the wielder of the godly sword will be the enemy of all evil. Duque's Integrity, special effect 2, enemy of males, you are the first target of evil masters such as Sargeras, Kil, Jaden, Arthas, and Illidan. After seeing you, they will easily lose their minds and reveal flaws. When facing the above, not limited to, evil masters, the attack power is increased by 300%. Duque's Integrity, special effect 3, soul torture, light and shadow are your weapons. When your integrity is gone, as the owner of this godly sword, you can increase the effect of shadow magic such as Mind Blast and Spirit Whip by 500%. Duque's Integrity, the magic supply is not complete. If it can absorb more elemental divinity, the power of the godly sword will be greatly increased. Duque held this strange godly sword in his hand and couldn't help but mutter to himself. When he lost his integrity, should he borrow a bow from Aurelia and use the godly sword as a bow and arrow? Wow! What a beautiful sword! Sasha's eyes were like stars. Can I touch it? Kalia asked softly. After getting Duque's approval, she reached out and caressed the body of the sword, which was not very sharp, as if she was touching a piece of art. Ha! Tyrande looked left and right. Even someone as knowledgeable as she had never seen such a special triple elemental godly sword before. Then, the hands of the black dragon mount, who was standing at the side, became itchy. It reached out and touched the edge of the sword lightly, and was immediately attacked. Ah! Onyxia screamed, and fainted with a hint of happiness amidst the pain. Her entire body twitched slightly, and she knelt on the ground in an extremely indecent position. There was even some white foam coming out of her mouth. Ah! She's... Kalia didn't understand at all. Why was she fine when she touched it, but Onyxia collapsed the moment she touched it? Duque held his forehead. Idiot! She actually dared to touch the evil Slayer sword before her evilness subsided. She's lucky she's not dead. Don't bother about her. Since he had gained enough benefits from the molten core, the next step was to find a certain black dragon prince to sacrifice. Duque didn't expect Nefarian to be more impatient than he had imagined. Almost at the same time that Ragnaros was killed, hundreds of huge dragon beasts appeared in the burning steppes and scorching canyon. These dragon beasts had the shape of a thunder man, but had a dragon's head. They held strange huge scimitars with 2 heads, and they attracted the attention of the Alliance's army the moment they appeared. Blast them! The dwarven commanders of the Alliance did not care at first. In this world, apart from fire-type creatures, there was nothing that couldn't be blown to death by a huge cannon. If there was, then too. That was what the dwarven cannoneers believed, and they acted accordingly. But after the earth-shattering volley of cannons, other than the red dragon beasts that fell, the other dragon beasts didn't stop. They waved their huge weapons and charged towards the Alliance's army without suffering any damage. Chapter 1185. What made the dwarf cannoneers even more depressed was that the red draconic beast that seemed to have been killed jumped up and charged even faster than before. It was even faster than its companions of the other colors. Just as the dwarf commander was about to fire a second round of probing shots, a new order came. Prince Lang has ordered that the enemy has a great damage reduction ability. He orders us to adopt the 4th formation and retreat immediately. Retreat. And in the 4th formation? The irascible dwarf commander was furious. But an order was an order. If he was not convinced, he could even punch Bu Lang in the command center. At least at this moment, he had to carry out the order. Duque had spent 20 years building the Alliance and had long built the Alliance's military discipline into an iron army. Within the scope of a commander, he could freely use his wisdom and command skills, but the general principles must be followed. The dwarf commander waved his hand. No matter how unwilling he was, the tank soldiers below had no choice but to surround a large number of heavy steam tanks into a long battle line. Then, they jumped off the tanks themselves and got on the faster and lighter steam-armored vehicles to escape. Not only that, but there were also dwarf engineers and some professionals who quickly set up layers of defensive lines, such as sticky grease, flame belts, and frost traps. Just as the front line was retreating, the commander finally saw the horror of the dragon through the telescope. Their bodies were 3 or 4 stories high, and one could tell that they were extremely powerful. The steam tanks that were nearly 2 stories high were easily overturned by them. The shoddy pig iron railings that were in the way were sliced apart like butter by the huge double-headed crescent blades. What was more terrifying was that these strange dragon beasts were almost invulnerable to water and fire. Scorching flames, extreme frost, mysterious arcana techniques. At the very least, he couldn't find anything that was particularly effective against these guys at first glance. In the command center, Bu Lang Bronzebeard looked at the image of the front line on the magic mirror and shouted, "Damn it! Is this Nefarian's big gift?" Sure enough, Duque was right to keep an eye on that guy. Captain Blackaville expressed his concern, "What do we do? The king and the Alliance have not finished the battle in the Molten Core. We lack the strongest force." Bu Lang turned his head, stroked his beard, and revealed a mysterious smile, "Captain, do your duty. What you were worrying about was no more yesterday." What? The entire Northern Front Command Center was filled with an ecstatic atmosphere. Ha ha ha. I knew they wouldn't let us down. Long live the Alliance. The dwarves were straightforward and a little noisy. If it weren't for the fact that they were facing a great enemy, these fellows would probably have immediately taken out the flat metal bottles hidden on their bodies and poured a few mouthfuls of wine into their mouths on the spot. Dwarves could hide secrets, but only true secrets. For this kind of secret that Bu Lang claimed to keep secret, but was actually no longer a secret, these big-mouthed mid-level commanders easily infected their subordinates with their optimism. What? Defeat? No. We're just making a strategic retreat. When our king returns with the Balrog's hammer, he can immediately teach these damned draconic beasts a lesson. Oh. What did I just say? No, I didn't say anything. Humph. With Bu Lang taking the lead, the other commanders all passed on the orders to their superiors with a look that said, "You know what I mean." In the end, even though they were defeated and retreated, the Northern Front Army, with the dwarves as the core, still held their heads high. This scene was reflected to Nefarian, who was puzzled. In just 20 years, the alliance has already grown into such a terrifying behemoth? However, it made sense when he thought about it. When the alliance was at its most desperate, there was a time when the capital of several kingdoms fell. Even during the undead scourge, as the leader of the alliance, Lordaeron, was once destroyed. However, under the leadership of Duque, the alliance rose again and cleared all the evil forces out of Lordaeron in one fell swoop. Even when the veterans of the alliance bragged to each other, they would say that a war between two kingdoms was not a war. After experiencing multiple annihilations and rebirths, the will and tenacity of the alliance's soldiers had been tempered and tempered. In Stormwind City, Duque received the news from the front line on the balcony of the Duke's mansion and let out a long sigh. Am I still too cautious? Duque suddenly smiled bitterly. The alliance is no longer the alliance 20 years ago. The alliance now is definitely more tenacious than you think. I'm even willing to believe that even if our hero squad is wiped out this time, the alliance will not be completely defeated. There will be more heroes born to carry the flag we left behind and carry on the past. Aurelia sat on the carved iron railing of the balcony and swayed as if she was using the railing as a swing. She swayed so much that she was almost parallel to the ground several times. Even so, with her superb balance and unimaginable waist and abdominal strength, she did not fall. Duque nodded in response to his lover's consolation. Yes. When Magni and Gavin Rad are ready, we'll take the two artifacts and raid Nefarian's nest. Although Magni's Balrog hammer could be used now, it had not been adjusted. After all, it was originally a war hammer used by a fire elemental lord. To adjust it to be used by mortals, it would require a large number of sulfuron iron ingots to modify. Gavin Rad's wind sword was more troublesome. According to the guidance of the ancient soul attached to the skull of imprisonment of the Wind Seeker, Gavin Rad's legs were about to break. This was because he had to cross half the planet to run to Silithus on the Kalimdor continent. Fortunately, Theramore had a fixed teleportation gate now, or he would have died just by taking the ship. Duque, aren't you worried that Nefarian will find out that you're stalling? Duque waved his hand. It's fine. Although the Black Dragons love to play tricks, after tricking Nesario and Onyxia, Nefarian will probably give up on this idea. He's very different from the other Black Dragons. He's the one and only scientific geek among the Black Dragons. Scientific geek. When Duque found a way to explain to Aurelia what a scientific geek was, Aurelia smiled beautifully. After she finally finished laughing, Aurelia suddenly turned around. Her long white legs turned around, and her nimble toes tapped on Duque's leg. Like a little person walking, her fingers approached Duque's abdomen. By the way, Duque, it seems like we haven't practiced swordsmanship for a long time. Are you interested now? Duque raised his head slightly and looked at the Mount Hyjal, which was illegal by both elven and human standards. He then looked at the flexible waist and the long legs that occupied half of his vision, and swallowed his saliva. Practice. Must practice. Practice to death. Aurelia, you're digging your own grave. How dare you face the power of Duque's godly sword alone? Who's afraid of who? Aurelia's face was flushed seductively. Chapter 1186. Yes. Yes. The sword flashed. The result of the battle was naturally Aurelia's defeat. With the Red Dragon Queen's blessing, Duque was in an invincible position. The only problem was when Aurelia would be defeated. Aurelia unexpectedly lasted a long time but was defeated in the end. I can't. Spare me, let me go, Aurelia cried. Hee. Don't losers let winners do whatever they want? Duque smirked. Don't. Enough. You don't want me to be afraid when I see you in the future. Aurelia slyly resisted. Duque really didn't want Aurelia to develop a phobia of practicing swords. He could only speed up and give her the final blow before hugging her warmly. Aurelia. Do you really want a child? Duque gently played with her brilliant blonde hair. Yes. But, let's leave it to fate. Aurelia gently rubbed Duque's big hand and felt at ease. Speaking of which, it feels wonderful. I used to want to kill every orc and troll. Now I'm a little used to fighting side by side with the strong horde. Duque couldn't help but be speechless. After a while, he laughed. If the chief of the horde has always been Thrall and there's enough external pressure, maybe there really is a chance for the Alliance and the horde to unite peacefully. Although Duque himself found it hard to believe that day would come, it was still a possibility. Now that they were facing a great enemy, Duque didn't mind giving the horde some benefits fairly. It wasn't like he didn't want to try this. Even if the Alliance and the horde have such a grudge. It's not rare. When that day comes, Thrall will make a wise choice. What if Thrall isn't the chief and the horde hates the Alliance? In this world, in addition to an equal alliance, there's also a relationship called conquest. Duque's gaze seemed to have crossed the distant starry sky, through the endless distance and time, and landed on the celestial empire on Earth. In the beginning, the Han people were just a small tribe that guarded a pitiful few hundred square kilometers of land. After a few thousand years, they finally became the great country that they are today. Did they rely on words? Stop joking. Conquering by force and assimilating people was a law that had been used throughout the world and even the entire multiverse since ancient times. If the orc tribes had won the first and second great wars at the Dark Portal, then the ones who would shout, "Never be slaves" would be the humans, dwarves, and elves. Now, the tribe had no choice but to cross the sea and guard the barren land. This predicament was just a consequence of the failure of the invasion. In the future, whether or not the Alliance would take the initiative to attack the Horde would depend on the strength of the Alliance and the Horde, as well as who was the boss of the Horde. The key was still the timing. If the tribe was strong enough, and a strong enemy was about to arrive, starting a war between the Alliance and the tribe at this time was tantamount to digging their own grave. If the Alliance had completely suppressed the Horde, and it happened to be in the gap between the two wars in the original history, and if the person in charge of the tribe was no longer Thrall but brainless Roar, then Duque would have to give it his all. Duque did not know that at this moment, something big was happening in the tribe. Grom and the others took advantage of the gap between conquering the Molten Core and attacking Blackwing's nest to return to the tribe. The warriors of the Horde always admired the strong. When they found out that Grom and the others had defeated the ancient elemental demigod, the king of fire demons, Ragnaros, they gave Grom and the others an overwhelming amount of praise. Even the death of 3,000 elites was greatly diminished. In Orgrimmar, the orcs all rushed over to see Grom and the others' spoils of war, pure-blooded firehawks and small molten hellhounds. Of course, the warriors were more envious of the new epic equipment that Varrock and the others were wearing. What an amazing achievement. This is even comparable to the war wolves that our ancestors tamed in the wilderness. The Alliance doesn't look too bad. The Alliance also promised to help us kill the traitor Blackhand. Fierce discussions even appeared among the guards on duty beside Thrall. Thrall suddenly looked back and asked, "Wajin, what do you think of the current alliance?" Wajin touched his long fangs, fair, and more generous. "It is very different from the alliance you described." Thrall emphasized, "I didn't lie to you." Wajin nodded, "I know." Even Duque himself admitted that during the period when King Tyrrhenas led the alliance made many mistakes and lacked true fairness and justice. Thrall sighed, if the alliance did not make mistakes, the Horde would never have a chance to rise. This was what Thrall was most worried about. As long as there are still strong enemies, the Alliance will not dare to attack the Horde, Wajin reminded euphemistically. Yes. War is an opportunity. Peaceful coexistence only existed when the enemy was stronger or when the strength of each other was equal. Once the strength was out of balance, the weaker party would definitely be unlucky. Originally, westward Kalimdor was a good move. Directly avoiding the Eastern Kingdom, the most powerful continent of the Alliance, avoided direct conflict with the Alliance, and could give the Horde a broad space to recuperate. As long as fertility and technological development were encouraged, when the new generation of the Horde grew up, the Horde and the Alliance might be able to fight. Unfortunately, the timing was not good. The conflict between the Horde and the Night Elves, coupled with the heavy losses suffered in the Battle of Mount Hyjal, caused the Night Elves to fall directly to the Alliance. Now the Night Elves' territory in Theramore, one north and one south, clamped down on Agrima, which made the Horde very uncomfortable. Thrall said solemnly, "Wajin, I would like to introduce you to a very important guest. I am inclined to let him and his race join the Horde. I will summon the chiefs." Wajin got up from his seat. "Wait. Don't call Grom and Kane, they are a bit too honest. I want to hear your opinion first." Wajin's eyes were half closed. He suddenly thought of something, but in the end, he bowed deeply, "As you command, Great Chief." Surprisingly, Sal did not meet the mysterious guest in the Valley of Heroes. Instead, he took Wajin to a cellar deep under the city of Orgrimmar. Wajin noticed that the guards in the cellar were all Thrall's personal guards. Opening the door and entering the cave, Wajin's heart suddenly beat wildly. Now he knew why. "Hello. Chief Wajin, I am the former king of the Elven Kingdom of Kuel Salis, and now the leader of the Forsaken, an Astrian Sunstrider." The appearance of the former Elven king was not particularly surprising, but the existence of the other one was simply shocking. "Sorry, if possible, I do not want to meet in this way, but for the future of the Horde, I have accepted my new fate." The one who spoke was the former great chief of the Horde, Orgrim. He was standing in this place with the identity of the Undying. If Duque hadn't killed Nesario and subdued Onyxia, perhaps Thrall would still have hoped for Nefarian's success. The problem was that Duque's glorious battle record was just short of being engraved on his forehead with the words Black Dragon's Bane. Moreover, the betrayal of the Black Hand brothers forced Sal to invest more experts and troops. Otherwise, the foundation of the tribe's rule would be shaken. The first attack had already failed. If they wanted to kill the traitors, the Alliance's strength was indispensable. If the Alliance found out that the Forsaken were to join the tribe at this time, who knew what extreme reaction the Alliance would have? One had to know that the Alliance's Sin Dorii Empire regarded Anastrian as a traitor and vowed to destroy the former king. The Alliance also had little chance of reconciling with the Forsaken because the new queen of Sin Dorii, Sylvanas, and the other two Windrunners were Duque's women. There was no way to untie this kind of knot. Even if the Alliance received the news and suppressed it first, it didn't mean that they wouldn't retaliate afterwards. The Alliance's revenge was still not something the tribe could bear. Obviously, Anastrian also knew this, which was why he had such a heavy bargaining chip now. The Sun King saw the hesitation of Sal and Woken. He stepped forward and bowed. The Forsaken do not need the public support of the tribe. In case the Alliance attacks our territory, we do not need the tribe's reinforcements. We only need a promise from the Great Chief. In case the tribe is in a desperate situation, please allow the Forsaken to support the tribe. Wow! One-sided support. What a great sentiment. What a weighty weight. Even Sal couldn't help but be moved when he heard it. Only Woken heard something different. Wait. Great Chief, did they tell you how many tribal chiefs the Forsaken have resurrected? Thrall was still too young. The resurrection of Orgrim was enough to stun him and throw him into a state of confusion. Now that Woken had woken up, Sal suddenly realized that there must have been a considerable number of strong tribal chiefs joining the Forsaken, which was why the leader, Anastrian, made such a huge concession. When Sal turned his head, he saw Orgrim let out a long sigh, and then Anastrian showed a victorious expression. Orgrim, speak. The former Sun King showed a cunning smile. Samuro, Kilrog, Zuluhid, yes. That's right. Almost all the tribal chiefs who died in the First and Second Wars, except for Black Hand, were resurrected by Anastrian as undead. Not only that, but he also added an equally heavyweight bargaining chip. In fact, I also found the Twilight Hammer clan. Great Mage Gujar has 2,000 two-headed ogre mages under him. Sal and Woken's eyelids were twitching. Mages. They were the mages that the tribe lacked and needed the most. Especially Woken, as a troll, he knew too well how fragile a troll without the mysterious power was under the destructive power of magic. No matter how brave the warriors of the tribe were, could they resist the overwhelming coverage of cannons and magic? What's more, after a series of wars, the population of the orcs had not yet exceeded 200,000. The entire tribe, including the Taurens, trolls, and goblins, only had a mere 500,000 people. This was simply disproportionate to the tens of millions of people and millions of troops of the Alliance. Rather than saying that the Forsaken needed the protection of the tribe, it was better to say that the tribe was more eager for the spellcasters of the Forsaken. In any case, the increase in combat power brought by the Archmages of the Silver Moon Council and the two-headed ogre mages was something that the tribe urgently needed. Orgrim walked up to Sal and put one hand on Sal's shoulder. The big hand that used to be hot was now cold and stiff. I am also helpless to leave such a mess to you. But I still hope that the tribe will be an independent tribe, and not a puppet of the Alliance. Now let us be the secret backing of the tribe. If it really doesn't work, then we will fight to the death with the Alliance. Chapter 1188. Krug Skullcracker used to be a brave orc warrior of the Blackrock clan. 20 years ago, he answered the call of the chief Blackhand and crossed the void from Draenor to Azeroth, participating in the most tragic battles. He personally participated in the most terrible naval battle of Paladin Bay, the Retreat of Southshore, the Battle of Eagle Nest Mountain, the Battle of Long Song Forest, the Battle of Alterac, the Battle of Lordaeron, and the Battle of Blackrock Mountain that left all the orcs depressed. Then, he became a captive. After a series of battles, the Blackrock clan turned from the most glorious orc clan to the most marginalized small clan. Because of the decline and glory of the Blackrock clan, he was maliciously appointed as a slave foreman in the shelter of Gorehold Castle to watch over his compatriots. The position of an orc foreman in the slave camp was definitely not a good one. He was destined to be hated by his own compatriots and threatened by the scheming humans. If you don't do it, I'll kill 10 of your compatriots first and then tell them that it was you who suggested it. He had sacrificed a lot for his compatriots, but they didn't understand or acknowledge him. Krug didn't know how he survived those 15 years. When Thrall liberated the orcs of Gorehold Castle, he also escaped to Orgrimmar with his compatriots. But because he helped humans punish his compatriots, because of this resentment, he had always been ostracized and isolated. At the beginning of the 21st year of the Dark Portal, the Blackhand brothers from the Blackrock clan, Rend and Maim, openly rebelled. Even Varrock Salufar, a big shot from the Blackhand clan, was affected and reprimanded, let alone a small figure like Krug. After that incident, it was the 8th time he was beaten. When he was young, he could easily beat down 10 of the brats who beat him today. Unfortunately, he wasn't young anymore, and the torture of the decline of the demon's blood had exhausted his vitality and courage. He was angry. He roared. He wasn't satisfied. He wasn't satisfied. But so what? No matter how just a leader was, he couldn't spread his favor to every corner of the tribe. The bullying continued. At this time, a ghost-like female figure found him. When he was asleep, Krug, do you hate? Are you angry? Don't you want to take revenge on those idiots? If it weren't for your protection, they would have died long ago. Hate. Of course I hate him. Krug subconsciously replied in a daze. Now you have a chance. You just need to do this, no. I will not betray my people. Betrayal? No. This isn't a betrayal. It's just to prevent the Undying, who desecrated the tribe's glory, from extending their evil palms to the tribe and bewitching your great leader, Sal. I agree, go, put this thing in these places. Alright, in Duke Marcus' residence in Stormwind City, Duque received news of Anastrian's secret visit to Orgrimmar. That's right, it was Duque's Onyxia who had hypnotized and induced Krug Skullcracker. The Black Dragon Princess failed to set off a rebellion in Stormwind City, but Duque took a fancy to her quality and ability and threw her to the tribe. From the beginning, Duque didn't think that Anastrian would obediently wait for destruction. To some extent, the alliance between the Forsaken and the tribe was more likely to be the trend. That was why Duque had long set up a backup plan. It was just that Onyxia had joined him, which made things more convenient for him. The thing that Duque placed in Orgrimmar was a very ingenious thing. It was a magic tool that Duque named Powerhouse Detection Device. It wouldn't emit any magical waves, but it would record all magical waves like a recorder and transmit signals to a specific channel from time to time. Other than the system elf, no one could analyze these signals. After some analysis, the system elf almost immediately deduced that Anastrian was in Orgrimmar. This was because when the Sun King fell, all of his magical waves, characteristics of his soul, and other data were all recorded. After a comparison, the results were immediately out. The only thing that surprised Duque was the system's judgment, the Death Knight version of Orgrimmar. This news made Duque grit his teeth. The human Onyxia swayed her sexy and charming body as she reminded Duque, although Master's device is ingenious, the beast men are too clumsy. He placed several detection devices in terrible locations. Oh, is that so? Duque smiled as he continued exploring the dragon's cave. He's just a cover. Anyway, it's better if Thrall finds that thing. Oh. Onyxia's black eyes suddenly lit up. She suppressed her senses and pricked up her ears to listen to Duque's next words. Guess where my real bug is? In the batch of wood you gave to the tribe? No. Duque smiled and shook his head. In the giant wood that Thrall had the Warsong clan spend a lot of effort to secretly harvest from Grey Valley. Alright. I finally understand why I failed before. Onyxia was finally convinced. She thought that her previous schemes were unparalleled in the world. Who would have thought that 10 of her could not compare to one Duque? Of course, the key was the bonus of the transmigrator. What could give him a greater sense of accomplishment and more trustworthy than stealing something from the hands of his enemy after going through so much trouble? No tribe would have thought that in the main buildings of Orgrimmar, every beam, every main pillar, was sealed with a druid's spell. Onyxia suddenly felt her body become hotter. As expected of my master. Stronger than me in combat. Even his stratagems are superior to mine. Ha ha ha. You are indeed my destined conqueror. While Duque was regularly taming Onyxia with the dragon-taming whip, Varrock Salufar came to find Thrall. Great Chief, I think you should come and see this. Sar frowned as he looked at the mysterious object that Varrock handed to him. It looked like a small stone, but when it was opened, it turned out to be an extremely delicate object. He called Wajin over. After a while. Wajin, what do you think? Great Chief, first of all, what is the opinion of the warlocks? A very delicate magic eavesdropper. They must have used human magic. Sal narrowed his eyes. The Alliance. That is indeed a reasonable answer. Wajin said thoughtfully. What else do you see? No. It's not the Alliance. You see, although this thing is delicate, there are a lot of meaningless parts. Chapter 1189. Woken continued, although I don't know magic, my people have quite a good understanding of magic. The arrival of the Darkspear trolls in the Kalimdor continent was also a new beginning. After suffering enough losses during the Troll Empire, the trolls set foot in the field of magic. After 5 years, there were already many low-grade trolls. Similarly, the trolls were also a good helper in the field of shamans. Woken's words were convincing to Sal. Go on. Yes, great chieftain. Woken reminded, I don't know if the great chieftain has noticed, but under the impetus of Duke Marcus, the Alliance is showing a model of large-scale production. As long as the number of required exceeds 100, they will use something called molds to reduce the production cost. Sal and Varrock nodded at the same time. They had seen the standard weapons of the Alliance. The Horde also wanted to learn, but it needed a complete industrial system as a foundation. However, the Goblin Princes of Trade were especially stingy. Every time they talked about these matters, they would take small steps back like squeezing toothpaste out of a tube. This made Sar a little annoyed. Back to the original point, Woken held up 3 almost identical bugs in his hand. I have reason to believe that there are definitely hundreds of these things in Orgrimmar. But have you noticed that these things are handmade and too complicated? Even in the eyes of a layman like me, many of the parts are just for decoration. I once overheard Duque instructing people to make weapons and said, it's a sin to use 11 parts for a part that can be done with 10 parts. When Woken said this, the answer was already obvious. This was a good thing done by a force that did not have a complete industrial system and wanted to alienate the relationship between the Alliance and the Horde. Bastard! Varrock was furious. Who knew that he would be stopped by Sal's big hand? Don't go, there's no point. And we don't have much choice. If the Horde wanted to pull a relative balance with the Alliance, it was imperative to join a new, magic-oriented force. Sal suddenly understood why Orgrim chose to believe in Dan even though he knew that it was not a good idea to let the Death Knights join the Horde, because Orgrim had no choice. At that time, the Blackrock clan had already suffered heavy losses. As the great chieftain, he had to find more people to make up for the losses. In a sense, this was like drinking poison to quench thirst. Even though he knew that it was probably poisoned, he had no choice but to drink it first in order not to die of thirst. Sal felt that he, the great chieftain, was really aggrieved. On the other side, Duque was laughing heartily. Because in Onyxia's eyes, he saw a look that he had never seen before, worship. Ugh, taming a rebellious female black dragon whose brain was full of bad ideas was really a sense of achievement. However, Duque's attention was now attracted by another matter. Boss. It's done. In the middle of the night, Gavin Rad actually came knocking on his door. If Duke had not just finished taming the dragon, he would probably have slapped him into the wall so hard that he wouldn't even be able to pull him out. All right. On the account that the Wind Sword was the first divine weapon in his life, I'll endure it for now. Of course, there was a more important reason. Nefarian's dragons had already appeared in the territory near Loch Moden. While Duke seemed to be chatting cheerfully with his mount when he had something to do, and when he had nothing to do, the situation north of the Scorching Canyon was getting worse. In order to stop the dragons from invading Loch Moden, Boulang Bronzebeard had no choice but to blow up the huge tunnel at the Stone Dam Trail. The dragons continued to invade Loch Moden through the barren lands and prepared to attack the dwarves' territory. Although Duque had secretly ordered the dwarves to evacuate Loch Moden, which had just recovered a little after World War II, was destroyed by the flames of war. Not only that, but the army of dragons had also begun to advance from the Burning Steppes to the Reedridge Mountains. Without an effective way, the Reedridge Mountains would not be able to hold on. The easiest way to stop Nefarian's draconic army was to attack the draconic beasts head-on. This was very troublesome. If Duque's memory was correct, Nefarian had designed a very disgusting characteristic for these dragons. They were basically immune to physical attacks and were also immune to most types of magic. Only certain specific elements could cause them double the damage. If the dragon's weakness was fire, ice, or arcane magic, it would be easy to deal with it. After focusing on training mages, the Dalajan had an explosion of talents after rebuilding. However, Nefarian had mixed a large number of dragons with nature magic as their weakness. Dor God's Three Natures. This was the slogan summed up by many people in the game after they were wiped out. This was because in this era when the Night Elves had just joined the Alliance, the Druids had not developed a strong enough balance magic. At the time when there were no shamans in the Alliance generally lacked nature magic. Duque was very clear about how terrifying the dragons were. If he led the army to fight the dragons head-on, they just had to encounter a large number of dragons that even the mages and warlocks could not deal with. If the dragons that even 10 bulls could not hold back launched a crazy attack on the mages, then this day next year would be the day of mourning for the mages in the Alliance. Duque needed an insurance policy. Gavin Rad, are the materials ready? Yes. Gavin Rad said with a pained expression. Even though he was the Supreme General of the Alliance and the Duke of Stormwind, gathering the materials almost cost him his fortune. In the 21st year of the Dark Portal, arcane gold ingot was definitely a rare item, not to mention the need for 100 of them. When Gavin Rad went to Silithus to find a guy called Dimitrian and found out about the list of materials, he was devastated. Fortunately, Duke was rich and generous, so he gave him a hand, and he was able to gather the materials. Of course, to create the wind sword, elemental ingot, was needed. The basic material, elemental ore, was the elemental ore that Duque asked Majordomo Executus to cheat from Nefarian before he killed Ragnaros. Elemental ore was not something important to Nefarian. Although he was puzzled by Majordomo's request, in order to maintain this fragile alliance, Nefarian gave it to him. This was why Gavin Rad used arcane gold ingot and elemental ore to create elemental ingot. At daybreak, the strongest of the Alliance gathered in the desert of Silithus, quietly waiting for Gavin Rad to summon the Windseeker Prince Thunderin. Chapter 1190. Endless yellow sand and incessant gusts of wind. Standing on top of a sandstone peak in Silithus, Tyrande, who was standing beside Duque, combed her dark blue hair. Even so, she could not stop the wind from blowing her hair like willow branches. The few strands of silver hair in front of her forehead added a mysterious aura to her blue hair. At this time, Gavin Rad came up to Duque and wagged his tail. "Boss, if I free the poor Wind Prince, will he reward me with the divine weapon?" Although Duque wanted to say yes, he knew what was going to happen next. A lonely and pained soul, imprisoned for 25,000 years. No one knows what will happen during this time. This is why I gathered so many strong people, in case. Feeling the seriousness in Duque's voice, Gavin Rad also realized that what was going to happen next might not be as good as he thought. "Oh, alright, if this is my fate, I will accept it." From being frivolous and excited to being serious, Gavin Rad's transition was so skillful. Indeed, even the most unreliable Gavin Rad had matured. Gavin Rad turned around and ran down to prepare. Suddenly, Tyrande secretly held onto Duque's hand. "Sorry, Duque, I suddenly thought of Illidan." They were both deeply in love, but it seemed like Illidan and Prince Thunderin did not have a good ending. One was imprisoned for 10,000 years, then fell to the path of demons. The other was imprisoned for 25,000 years, and in the end, Tyrande did not dare to continue imagining, afraid that she would recall the past. She had once used herself as a sacrifice and burned herself to be with Duke, but she was shocked to find that the situation had reversed. The darkest evil could very well be the brightest light, and when she finally thought that she could enjoy this legendary happiness, she found that she had no choice but to face a separation of 10,000 years. If not for the busy family affairs, she might have gone crazy. She did not dare to imagine what would happen to Thunderin, who had once loved her deeply. "Duque. Hug me," Tyrande murmured. This had nothing to do with lust. It was purely a spiritual need. Duque conjured an illusion of him and Tyrande, before hugging the priestess who always appeared strong, holy, and otherworldly, using his lips to nourish her fragile heart that was like a candle flickering in the wind. After a long while. "Do you feel much better?" "Yes." Tyrande nodded. "However, please do not leave us again. I hope you will remember that you are not fighting alone." When Duque brought Tyron down the stairs, he found himself surrounded by a large group of queens, Sylvanas, Kalia, Elucia, Jaina, and Windrunner's eldest and third sisters. Perhaps they had all sorts of thoughts, but it was clear that everyone had the same goal, for the future of the Alliance, and for everyone's future. On the specially selected open plains, the insect-type monsters that were originally wandering here had long been cleared by the professional teams of the Alliance. Within 10 miles, apart from the Alliance's experts, there was no one else. Duque nodded at Gavinrad. When Gavinrad brought the left and right halves of the skull of the Wind Chaser's imprisonment, and the essence of the Flame King, that he dug out from Ragnaro's doppelganger, he walked in front of the old human Dimitrian who worshipped Prince Thunderin. Dimitrian's tears flowed down his face. This white-haired human fanatic knelt on the ground, sobbing uncontrollably. "Ah! You have found your master's cage. The long-cherished wish of many generations. I have been waiting for this day for a long time. My wish can finally come true. You must free my master. Now!" Immediately. Dimitrian's ecstasy was a stark contrast to the indifference of the experts around him. Duque was a fraud. Duque clearly wanted everyone to prepare for a fight. That battle was definitely unavoidable. Especially after the Feather Moon General Chandri secretly told everyone the story of Illidan, no one had any hope for Prince Thunderin. Everyone watched calmly. Dimitrian, this fanatic who worshipped the wind element, chanted an incantation that outsiders did not understand, and easily caused the atmosphere to shake. Bang! It was as if a large bomb exploded less than 3 meters in the sky above Dimitrian. The dust that was stirred up filled the sky, and along with the strong wind, it dispersed like a shockwave. Bang! Another shockwave. If it hit someone's eyes, it would definitely blind them. The people here were all powerful people who could easily shoot down flying arrows at their peak state. Especially the fully armed warriors and paladins standing in the front row. As long as they paid attention to not let the stones hit their eyes, normal flying stones would not be able to hurt them at all. A few thieves and paladins were even more exaggerated. With super high agility and dynamic vision, most of them waved their daggers non-stop, easily knocking away the flying stones and protecting the healers at the back. Duque did not activate the ice barrier. He calmly watched the airflow swirling in mid-air, forming a huge half-human figure. Prince Thunderin appeared. He had a body that emitted white light. The lower half of his body was a spinning tornado, and the upper half of his body was a standard human figure. The sturdy armor wrapped around his huge body, and the 4 sharp spikes on his shoulder armor were very eye-catching. 2 layers of overlapping petal-shaped armor protected his shoulders very well, and the silver-white arm armor emitted powerful wind elemental waves. Without words, the Wind Prince, who was more than 10 stories tall, almost cut his fanatic, Dimitrian, in half. Clang! A loud sound of metal clashing almost broke the eardrums of the surrounding people. After inheriting Mograine's Ashbringer, Tyrion Fordring used this godly sword that belonged to him for the first time today, and swung it for the first time. The bright golden light and the wind of the Wind Prince, who had been imprisoned for 25,000 years, were evenly matched. In the distance, 2 figures in armor watched this scene. Suddenly, one of them felt sad, and 2 lines of old tears rolled down his face. He murmured, as expected, handing it over to Tyrion was the right choice. The other person patted his shoulder. "Alexandros, we are all old. It is time to pass the burden to the next generation. Until the last moment of the world's destruction, there is no place for us old fellows to appear. Yes. We should learn from Lothar. If we do not take over the position, it will only hinder the growth of the next generation." No one expected that after today, the 2 great marshals of the Alliance, Mograine and Abendis, would hand over their military power at the same time, and go to the logistics department to train new soldiers. The Scarlet Crusade was taken over by Sidon Dathrahan. The military power of Lordaeron was handed over to Tyrion Fordring. Chapter 1191. At that moment, no one knew that the two of them had made such a decision. Everyone's attention was still on Prince Thunderin. Looking at the berserk Wind Prince, Dimitrian was dumbfounded. My lord. Why? Why? No one from the Alliance had the time to answer him. Everyone knew that it was most likely the 25,000 years of imprisonment that made Thunderin the Wind Pursuer lose his mind and sink into madness. The wind elements in the atmosphere had already begun to boil. It was not an exaggeration to call them storm elements. Violent hissing sounds erupted everywhere in the sky. The weather in the sky suddenly changed. The clear sky a moment ago was now occupied by a gloomy storm. Just as the storm elements boiled to their strongest point, accompanied by the faint sound of thunder, Thunderin the Wind Pursuer's figure began to extend infinitely, suddenly occupying almost the entire sky of Silithus. What kind of giant elemental was that? Just his huge body was enough to cover the light of the sun and moon. He himself was a bigger cover than the clouds. It was as if his huge figure could replace the entire atmosphere, shrouding everyone and becoming a terrifying shadow that could not be removed. And just as the storm let out its most terrifying howl, all of Silithus, no matter whether it was animals, plants, mortals, or even some existences that transcended the mortal world, they were all stimulated violently. That was the oppression of the soul. Those that were slightly weaker were already shivering, their faces showing the darkest fear. That came from the memories of their ancestors, deeply imprinted in their genes and the deepest part of their bloodline. That was the most terrifying period of the Dark Empire 25,000 years ago. On the continent of ancient Kalimdor, the ancient gods Si, Thun and the Wind Elemental Lord attacked each other, leaving behind a terrifying memory. Hey hey hey. That's not right. We saved him and he returned our kindness with ingratitude. Why does this guy feel like he's stronger than Ragnaros? Gavin Rad, who was at the front, muttered. Suddenly, he felt a hand on his pauldron from behind. Duque? It was Duque. No one knew when he had come to the front from the back. He looked up at Prince Thunderin, who was constantly baring his fangs and brandishing his claws, making weird noises, and crazily expanding his body. He suddenly revealed a strange smile. Hey! Did none of you think of giving him a kick? Give him a kick. How? The opponent was a formless wind elemental. Wait. At this moment, everyone finally realized that the source of the wind was the skull of imprisonment of the Wind Pursuer, that someone had placed on the ground as an offering. Duque's kick was like a kitchen knife cutting a wire, and it was accompanied by thunder and lightning. It was this kick of the nature attribute that caused the originally perfectly placed skull to become crooked. Ah! This kick caused everyone to be extremely shocked because they saw to their astonishment that the boundlessly enormous figure in midair had instantly shrunk by countless times. Prince Thunderin did not fall with a kick like a paper man, but he was obviously affected by some unknown force. Only Ronan and Tyron noticed something. They had noticed the flash of light. Is this the radiance of divinity? Divinity? Jaina asked. Tyron nodded. Yes, it seems that Prince Thunderin wanted to spread his will to absorb and purify the elemental energy in the atmosphere, but was stopped by Duque. Duque raised his head, a mysterious smile on his face. Sunderland. I know you're angry. And very manic. You're eager to vent your anger. But you also have to see who defeated Ragnaros and released you. Roar, an earth-shattering roar and a sword strike was Prince Thunderin's answer. Duque frowned. This Prince Thunderin was obviously different from the prince in history. The Wind Prince in history had at least said a few words. Duque looked like he was thinking about life. He wasn't afraid of being hacked to death. If Magni with the Firelord's hammer and Theon with the Ashbringer were here, they would have been able to kill Duke. Then they wouldn't have been heroes in the first place. This time, it was Magni who activated Avatar. He swung the Balrog hammer and clashed with Prince Thunderin's wind sword without any fancy moves. Boom! The terrifying aura that was like a volcanic eruption overwhelmed Prince Thunderin. Not only was the prince's wind sword knocked back by the hammer, but his body that was leaning back was also strangely stiff. At this moment, anyone could see the weakness in the prince's seemingly strong and huge body. Everyone couldn't help but think of that legend. The wind chaser used to be so powerful, but he was ambushed. Although the Balrog king couldn't completely destroy him, he was split into two and imprisoned. One could only imagine how weak Prince Thunderin was after 25,000 years of torture. Since they couldn't communicate, the result was set. Kill him. Duque waved his cloak. He didn't even bother to attack. That's right. Prince Thunderin looked strong, but he was actually weak on the inside. 20,000 years of imprisonment had caused him to degenerate in all aspects, including his rationality. A weakened version of an elemental lord that only had its basic instincts and no special skills left, only knowing how to randomly hack and slash, could only be considered a large target. If they couldn't even deal with this, the Alliance's hero group could just commit suicide by jumping into the river. Duque sat at the back and quietly watched the pitiful Prince Thunderin walk into a dead end. Roar! Prince Thunderin was struck by lightning for showing off. Gavin Rad, who thought he could easily get a divine weapon, used his lightning power to strike the prince. Ah! The prince was furious. This was because Magni was holding the hand of Savras the Balrog Ragnaros, which had taught him how to be a human, and was now teaching him how to be a human. The prince was furious again. Ashbringer's blazing holy light reminded him of a group of titans who used this light to teach him how to be a human. Spells and arrows rained down on him like a torrential rain. Weapons filled with fire elements left scars on his frail body again and again. Unsurprisingly, the pitiful Prince Thunderin collapsed not long after he saw the light of day again in just 5 minutes. A large lump of something that looked like dust was the remains of the Wind Prince. In the dust, a small wind sword was especially eye-catching. This is... Gavin Rad was extremely curious. This is Wind's Kiss Blade. Take it and let that fanatic work. Just like in history, Thunder's Fury, blessed sword of the Wind Chaser, was finally made. Gavin Rad was so happy that he went around showing it off, until he was shocked to see that Duque was holding an identical wind sword. Duque's Integrity, Special Effect 4, Reality Transformation. With the support of the divinity of wind, you can transform the appearance of this sword into any sword weapon you have seen with your own eyes. According to your own strength attribute and your understanding of the artifact, you can display a certain degree of the artifact's power. Its maximum power does not exceed 70% of the original. With regards to this new feature, Duque was convinced. This was clearly asking him to play the imitation game to the end. Fine. It's useless for a mage to use the wind sword, but I can cosplay with a fake one, right? That was why when Duque was experimenting with the new effect, Li Gui met Li Kue. Seeing that Gavin Rad was on the verge of breaking down, Duke stabbed Duke's Integrity, which was in the shape of a wind sword, into the ground. Then, he put his hands on his waist and said, I see that your divine sword is very cool. I'll use magic to transform it, okay? Fine. You're the boss, you call the shots. Gavin Rad rolled his eyes. The next second, Duque suddenly attacked. Duque picked up the wind sword and stabbed it at Gavin Rad. At first, Gavin Rad and the others were dumbfounded, but they immediately understood what Duque was doing. As a mage without haste, Duque's lousy swordsmanship was like slow motion in front of these powerhouses. It was ridiculous. If Duque had suddenly gone crazy and wanted to cut Gavin Rad, it would not have been like this. The only explanation was that Duque wanted to fight Gavin Rad. With a flick of his wrist, Gavin Rad used the Thunder's Fury, blessed sword of the Windseeker. Bam! It was a simple clash of swords. The moment the two swords clashed, Gavin Rad immediately understood. The feeling from the blades told him that the two swords were different. Even though they had the same source of wind elemental energy, the fundamental difference was obvious. Duque's sword did not have Prince Thunderan's soul. Only Gavinrad's wind sword was the real deal. Gavinrad could feel that the sword in front of him did not have as much wind elemental energy as his, but it had fire elemental energy. Wind and fire elemental energy. Gavinrad suddenly understood. A normal powerhouse who was proficient in one element was already a powerful powerhouse. For example, Ronan had studied arcane magic to the extreme and became the chairman of the Dalajan Kirin Tor Parliament. Duque actually wanted to reach the peak of the four elements of earth, water, fire, and wind. And this was not an unattainable dream. It was a goal that could be achieved. Because Duque had already obtained the divinity of two of the strongest people in the territory. Boss, you have indeed chosen a different and noble path. Gavinrad could not help but be in awe and put away the wind sword of his own accord. As Duque put away the sword, he also removed the illusion of Duque's moral integrity. Everyone could finally see that Duque's divine artifact had returned to that strange spiral conical shape. Duque smiled evilly. Everyone's path is different. You choose your own path. Even if the end of the path is hell, you have to finish it even if you cry and kneel, right? Yes. Gavinrad's eyes flashed, and he suddenly stiffened up. All right. Gavinrad, it's rare to get a divine artifact. Don't you want to try the sword? Of course. Gavinrad said decisively. Leave the Riedridge mountain defense line to me. Duque smiled. That's good. Dear Mr. Storm Knight, Ronan, Jaina, and Elusia will accompany you. I will go to the barren lands with Tyrion. The pair of master and servant lightly touched each other's divine weapons, creating a whistling sound of the wind. The two divine artifacts of the same origin swung apart. At this moment, at the barrier between the barren lands and the dwarves' territory of Loch Moden, the dwarves had built the Greyclaw Mountain defense line according to Duque's suggestion 5 years ago in order to prevent attacks from wild beasts and Black Rock Mountain. It was a fulcrum formed by many fortresses, and it was connected to a continuous stretch of the city wall. Brian was very annoyed. You're tuning into the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.